young, driven guy named Choi Young-sung steps into the spotlight as the core of this story. From childhood, he chased knowledge and training, only to slam into the wall of having no natural talent. Every spare hour vanished inside the gym. His body pushed again and again, forging strength with his own hands. Losing his parents early burned a brutal lesson into him. In this world, self-reliance is the only rule. Training stopped being a hobby and became his only shield against the future's incoming blows. No matter how much effort he poured in, his ceiling stayed painfully low. Just another bottom-tier hunter. To understand who hunters really are, it's necessary to see how the world itself was rewritten. Years ago, Earth brushed against the abyss and reality cracked under the pressure. Humanity learned that gods were a myth, and their place in the cosmos was taken by mysterious constellations. These entities stockpiled power by expanding their followers and feeding their own influence. The constellations were locked in endless conflict, stealing servants and flexing dominance. Eventually, their eyes turned to Earth, and a real war ignited over the planet. The most savage constellations chose conquest through raw destruction rather than blessings. That moment gave birth to a new profession among humans, those who became known as hunters. They took on the role of protecting civilians from dungeons and abyssal monsters. Loot dropped from slain beasts quickly elevated hunters into the elite of the New World Order. With nothing left to lose, Young-sung chose the hunter's path without hesitation. A guild boss tried to talk sense into him, warning him against such a reckless move. Dungeons showed zero mercy, and low-rank hunters died more often than they returned. Young-sung refused to back down, convinced that real strength is born only in real fights. Friends kept telling him to slow down and live something resembling a normal life. His ex eventually left him, choosing dates over non-stop training, a textbook case of self-improvement beating romance. To outsiders, he looked like a lost cause, the kind of stubborn guy better left alone with his choices. The very next week, Young-sung joined a raid to clear an especially dangerous zone. Monsters waited there that outclassed him in power, speed, and experience. Against all logic, fear never touched him, and retreat never crossed his mind. He charged monsters barehanded, chasing growth rather than rewards. That relentless grind earned him a nickname among his peers, Master. Most hunters had already figured out that magic paid better than fists and blood. Young-sung stayed loyal to the old-school path, dreaming of becoming like his idol, Bruce Lee. Even when others wrote him off as useless, he kept studying martial arts. Those techniques were clean, direct, and honest compared to messy magic formulas. Pure physical skill fit perfectly with a body that lacked any magical gift. Young-sung wanted to prove that bare hands could still crush lethal monsters. Some nights, he trained until his muscles stopped responding. His level stayed frozen, and his confidence drained day by day. He collapsed into sleep exhausted, jaw clenched, still running drills in his mind. Until one day, a strange voice reached him, destined to flip his fate. A blinding flash of light cut through his senses and forced his focus. A goddess appeared before Young-sung, a being humans called a constellation. For the first time, a power like that turned its attention to a weak nobody from Seoul. The virtuous goddess of scales had been watching his discipline and grind for a long time. She knew him well enough to skip the build-up and get straight to the point. Today, she crossed into this world to offer Young-sung a deal. She was ready to explain the terms, but he agreed before she finished. He had lived at the bottom of the hierarchy for too long to hesitate. He asked for neither money nor authority, only a chance to raise his level. Self-growth had always mattered more to him than any reward. As it turned out, the goddess of scales possessed the power to see the future. Looking years ahead, she witnessed a catastrophic threat closing in on Earth. In the future, the evil constellations will crash down on Earth at full force, and even hunters won't be enough to stop them. Compared to the coming disaster, today's dungeons and monsters will feel like harmless kids' stuff. Strangely enough, Young-sung is the one destined to become the key figure capable of rewriting that dark future. The goddess promised to forge him into something stronger through endless, brutal, soul-crushing training. For a brief moment, even the goddess herself felt a chill of fear and subtly faltered. She knew perfectly well that only a madman could agree to a contract like this. Deals like this were never offered to hunters, since the risks outweighed the rewards by a landslide. The contract looked unfair and irrational, yet Young-sung's decision had already settled deep in his mind. Once a contract with a constellation was sealed, a human became an avatar. Their soul was bound to the constellation forever, condemning them to a life of harsh restrictions. In return, the avatar gained overwhelming power and top-tier magic. Because of their impatience, constellations often clashed violently over promising avatars. But since no one had ever chosen Yongsong before, he accepted every condition without hesitation. He had never been talented, and now this felt like his only shot at becoming the world's savior. The goddess prepared a training ground for him deep within the abyss, where his journey would begin. If he chose to turn back to his familiar, comfortable nest, there would be no road back. Time flows differently in the abyss, stretching training across hundreds of thousands of years, about as long as the wait for GTA 6. In his naivety, Yongsong believed he had landed the best deal imaginable. Other avatars grew stronger automatically the moment they signed their contracts. They didn't have to grind for hundreds of thousands of years, breaking themselves over and over. Yongsong didn't know that, and signed with absolute confidence. In the same instant, space warped, and he was violently pulled into the abyss. From that moment on, a chain of trials began, capable of either shattering him or turning him into Earth's savior. Yongsong stepped forward, took a deep breath, and leapt into the portal as if it were just another workout. The goddess immediately considered that his old friends might start searching for him. That was why a letter was left behind in his favorite training hall for the guild boss and his comrades. For a few seconds, Master hovered between the human world and the abyss. When the portal closed, a horrifying concentration of mana crushed down on his body. Looking around, Yongsong realized he was standing in the heart of the abyss itself. Scientists had long believed that dungeons were broken fragments torn from the abyss. Maybe that was why Yongsong didn't panic and managed to stay composed. He immediately began training, wasting no time, desperate to feel results as fast as possible. Meanwhile, the goddess returned to her own planet, barely hiding her satisfaction. All her attendants knew that despite her gift of foresight, the goddess faced serious limitations. She could see only fragments of the future, while everything else remained guesswork. In her sleep, the goddess saw Yongsong training in the abyss. In that vision, he repelled the invasion of evil constellations and held back the monster tide. She knew nothing beyond that, yet felt certain that he was the chosen one. Her attendants sensed unease but feared voicing their doubts and upsetting her. By this point, everything was set, and Yongsong was about to face his first true training trial. He hadn't been warned what awaited him, so the strange noise caught him completely off guard. A massive tornado closed in at terrifying speed, looking instantly lethal. Yongsong assumed this was the goddess's first test. She had warned that he would have to push beyond all limits and give everything he had. When the tornado hit, the hunter's body was literally torn apart. He barely endured the pressure before being ripped off the ground. In the next instant, Yongsong vanished, never realizing what had truly happened. When the magical storm settled, the illusions dissolved. This magic was meant as a safety measure, but Yongsong had never been told about it. Even the goddess hadn't foreseen this outcome, and the terrifying news wiped the smile from her face in an instant. The goddess couldn't understand why Yongsong still hadn't stepped onto the training arena. She had left him barely 10 meters from the citadel, just a few steps away from the start of real progress. Apparently, humans couldn't function on their own and always needed hand-holding. Otherwise, they froze in place like Roblox players with no guide. From her perspective, she had accounted for absolutely everything and taken full care of her avatar. Beyond food and training gear, she had even prepared small comforts to ease the loneliness. The training conditions were flawless, but now none of that seemed to matter. The goddess's closest aide thoroughly searched the entire training citadel and found no trace of the avatar. Anicap almost immediately assumed the magical storm was to blame. The goddess ordered him to do everything possible to locate Yongsong. Leaving a human wandering the abyss was not an option. Sooner or later, it would end in death. Ada promised to carry out the order, though deep down, he had little faith in success. The abyss was an endless void, and even the constellations had only mastered a tiny fraction of it. Finding a human swept away by a magical storm was close to impossible. The goddess tried to ignore logic and clung to a fragile thread of hope. By now, the raging flow of mana could have already erased Yongsong completely. Yongsong himself felt like he had sunk to the bottom of a deep ocean, his body constantly dragged downward. Over and over, he convinced himself this was just another trial and that all he had to do was endure. Gradually, his body began absorbing the surrounding energy, adapting to the crushing pressure. His bones hardened like poured concrete, and his muscles tightened into rigid steel cables. The surge in his inner Kai potential was the only reason his body didn't tear itself apart. Weeks later, Yongsong finally regained consciousness and realized with relief that he had survived his first true trial. Now, he needed to take in his surroundings and decide what came next. Rocky mountains stretched around him, a barren corner of the abyss claimed by no constellation. Suddenly, a massive stone monster emerged from nowhere, long and heavy, shaped like a colossal serpent. Yongsung had seen something similar in an old Pokemon cartoon, so the name Onyx came naturally to him. The trials already felt excessive, and for a moment he wondered if the goddess had overestimated him. But giving up wasn't in his nature, so he chose to challenge the stone serpent anyway. He poured every ounce of power into his opening strike, aiming to shatter the monster into fragments. Yongsung hoped for a miracle, but the terrifying Onyx didn't even flinch. Master then launched into relentless strikes, betting that non-stop pressure would eventually pay off. Before continuing to watch Yongsung, it's worth stepping back to remember how his path truly began. It all started the moment he picked up a book on divine martial arts that almost no one cared about. Wanting to mirror the idol of his youth, Yongsung deliberately chose an unpopular road. People looked at him like a clueless fool, but their judgment never mattered to him. Most hunters believed mana was the only life force behind magic users. Very few understood that Kai energy was the true foundation of living martial arts. Every stat and every ounce of damage output depended directly on the level of that energy. Serious progress required decades of training, and that alone scared most hunters away. Yongsung was always different and never cared about obstacles like that. In divine martial arts, there was no universal method for cultivating Kai. Every master followed their own rules and personal approach. That was why many hunters wasted years trying to find the right path. Only now did Yongsung begin to understand how his body needed to be filled with ki energy. By repeating the same movements, he could feel his reserves steadily growing. If he kept training like this endlessly, even he would eventually become a true martial arts master. On paper, it sounded simple, but very few could actually walk that road. Until now, Yongsung had believed he possessed no special talent at all. In truth, he was deeply mistaken, and only just beginning to realize it. His real talent was the ability to endure exhaustion and grind endlessly, the kind of stamina streamers need to clear Elden Ring without sleep. Even the Stone Onyx, watching his relentless training, slowly began to develop a sense of respect for him. Thanks to his one true talent, Yongsung endured more than 100 years of repeating the same actions without breaking. It was at that point that he mastered a mid-rank skill known as the Inner Destruction Fist. His level in divine cosmic martial arts automatically rose. Yongsung could now officially be called an advanced master. After the breakthrough, he finally felt for the first time that all those years of pain and grind hadn't been for nothing. His legs gave out, and hundreds of years of non-stop training flashed before his eyes. In that moment, he remembered the strongest hunter from China, a man named Li Xiaowan. He was the only martial arts master who had ever reached a high rank. Even after climbing to the top, he never stopped pushing, chasing the title of the world's strongest hunter. Yongsung dreamed of walking that same path, fully aware it would demand tens of thousands more years of training. After Yongsung's breakthrough, the Stone Serpent decided to acknowledge him for the first time. Until then, Onyx had completely ignored him, but now, even the monster felt the crushing pressure of his power. It could no longer endure that force and asked Yongsung to stop. In that moment, Yongsung realized that destroying the serpent would leave him completely alone in this world. That was how they became companions, slowly starting to spend their time together. He discovered that beyond raw strength training, riding on the monster's head was perfect for sharpening balance and stability. During one of those rides, Yongsung heard a sound that reminded him of his first day in the abyss. A magical storm was forming again on the horizon. Yongsung was certain this was another gift from the goddess, meant to carry him to a new location. At that moment, Onyx looked at him like he was completely unhinged. Despite every risk, they chose to leap straight into the storm. Onyx was convinced this would be the final day of his existence. The overwhelming force swept both wanderers away, hurling them toward unknown galaxies. After hours of endless flight, they finally crashed down hard. This wasn't Yongsung's first journey like this, so he stayed surprisingly calm. With every transition, his body soaked in more mana and grew tougher. Onyx quickly realized his friend had no real understanding of how the abyss truly worked. To be honest, Yongsung had already been insanely lucky twice not to be torn apart. Feeling hunger, Yongsung began scanning the area for something edible. With mana density that high, starvation wasn't a threat, but he still missed real food. Finding nothing around, he went back to training once again. For hours, he repeated the same movements, pushing strength and flexibility to the next level. Through his bond with Onyx, Yongsung learned the serpent's combat art and expanded his arsenal. Results came faster and faster, but the training itself grew unbearably dull. with progress running on autopilot like an endless Mr. Beast stream. At some point, Yongsong noticed a massive ocean nearby that he had never explored before. Onyx warned him that the water was poisoned, but Yongsong ignored it. He happily dove into the purple surface and immediately felt his body start to burn. The toxic water seeped inside, but his inner Kai energy shielded him. Over time, his body adapted to the poison, bringing new problems along with it. Local monsters noticed the intruder and decided it was feeding time. They swarmed him like savage piranhas, grabbing his arms and legs and dragging him downward. Minutes passed, and Onyx, waiting on the shore, began to seriously worry. Suddenly, an explosion echoed, and a poisonous tsunami surged toward him. Yongsong didn't just survive, he dominated the monsters in their own element. He made it through his first encounter with the Abyssal Ocean, and honestly, it turned out to be fun. That was when he decided that one day, he would cross the entire poisoned ocean. To do that, his endurance needed a massive upgrade, starting right now. Over the next several decades, Yongsong pushed himself to the limit, preparing for the next trial. The cost of that preparation was steep, demanding an enormous amount of time. As time passed, Yongsong began to miss Earth, and memories of his life before meeting the goddess surfaced more and more often. He already understood that there was no way back, which meant accepting the new reality and living by its rules. During one of his runs along the shoreline, Yongsong noticed a fish thrown onto the sand by the waves. Judging by its looks, a monster from the poisoned ocean was the worst breakfast option imaginable. But with no real alternatives left, Yongsong decided to take the risk because he was brutally hungry. At that moment, Onyx fully realized he had befriended a madman who eats toxic fish and calls it progress. To eat properly, at least some kind of preparation was needed. Yongsong headed to the nearest cliff and began smashing it into smaller fragments. From the sharp shards, he managed to craft a crude blade suitable for cutting meat. But the moment he started cooking, everything went sideways. Ordinary stones couldn't withstand the poison and began melting, turning into useless sludge. Onyx tried to warn his friend that this meat could easily kill him. When it became clear that Yongsong wouldn't back down, the stone serpent decided to intervene. He gave him a small piece of adamantium, one of the abyss's most valuable materials. This metal could withstand any pressure, making it perfect for a blade. The guild boss always said every hunter needed a hobby, and right now, those words felt painfully accurate. Cooking could support training, letting him stack progress on top of progress. Yongsong finished slicing the meat and finally committed to tasting it. Even back on Earth, he had never been picky about food. He had always treated meals as nothing more than fuel for growth and training. But the moment he swallowed the toxic meat, it felt like his insides tried to turn themselves inside out. For several agonizing minutes, the poison attempted to melt him from within. Thanks to his inner energy, his body adapted and developed resistance. His Kai level automatically rose, turning food itself into a source of progression. From that moment on, the master realized that training alone would no longer be enough. Yongsong swore to devour every monster in this ocean before ever leaving the planet. Long years passed, and the poison stopped registering as a threat. Every morning now began with ocean dives, hunting, and consuming toxic creatures. It all became routine, slow, dull, but delivering steady progress. Over time, Yongsong officially became a martial arts expert and stepped onto yet another tier. Staying on this planet grew unbearably boring, and he needed a new challenge. This was where his path split from Onyx's, though both knew they would meet again someday. Yongsong said goodbye to his friend and swam off toward the unknown. With complete resistance to poison, the ocean no longer posed any danger. Sea monsters had long memorized this human and nicknamed him the Earthborn Killer. They no longer felt like rulers of the ocean and fled in panic whenever he appeared. Having become a true emperor of the sea, Yongsong ventured into uncharted waters. There, he spotted a strange portal promising new sensations and fresh danger. With no guarantees at all, he swam toward the light and emerged in a completely different world. His divine cosmic art instantly warned him of incoming danger. The expert's body adjusted for combat automatically, long before his mind caught up. There were too many demons around, and every single one noticed the intruder. That level of bloodlust could only be felt in the highest tier dungeons. Each constellation's territory operated under its own brutal laws. You couldn't just show up and pretend the land was yours now. These monsters served another constellation and had no intention of giving up territory. They made the rules clear immediately. Any newcomer appearing without permission faced instant execution. Yongsong wasn't about to accept that outcome or die quietly. Maybe he wasn't fully ready to dive into this hell, but since he was already here, fighting was unavoidable. A massive demon aimed its blade at him, and in that instant, time itself seemed to freeze. Thanks to razor-sharp reflexes, Young-sung clenched his fist and compressed all his inner energy into it in a single instant. The blade collided with a human hand and shattered into fragments, like it had slammed into solid concrete. By the time the demon realized this wasn't a rookie, the window was already gone. One brutal strike later, the master sent him flying into a devastating knockout. The remaining demons froze, watching their boss drop helplessly to the ground. Young-sung slowly scanned the area and calmly made it clear that he had come here to clear a test. No one understood what that was supposed to mean, but from that moment on, the dungeon's rules changed. Monsters who believed themselves untouchable ran into something they were never prepared for. Some random human was tossing them across the hall like cheap action figures. After centuries of training and endless refinement, Young-sung had stepped beyond conventional mastery. Enemy numbers stopped mattering and didn't even register as a concern. A casual warm-up ended with the first wave of monsters knocked unconscious. Then, the backup squad rushed in and repeated the exact same mistake. Even hellhounds failed to scare someone who had long treated magical storms as part of his routine. Young-sung delivered a ruthless lesson in discipline and made it painfully clear who ran the place. He could almost feel that within the Bloodlord's domain there was only one rule. Local avatars were forced into endless combat, grinding against each other to raise their mastery. Young-sung fit into this world perfectly and accepted its laws without hesitation. Spotting something that looked like a restaurant, he walked straight in without a second thought. The owner appeared friendly and cheerful, then presented the guest with a bowl of fragrant soup. Young-sung allowed himself to relax, thinking for the first time that even the abyss had room for warmth and support. He was starving and immediately agreed to pay any price for the meal. A second later, the owner drenched him in toxic resin without warning. Service on par with peak hour Uber, straight to hell included. The demon was convinced there wouldn't even be ashes left of the human. But absolute poison immunity instantly restored Young-sung's body. He straightened up and calmly made it clear that he had hated tricks like this since childhood. By then, the remaining monsters had already surrounded the restaurant in a tight ring. Escape seemed impossible, and death felt inevitable. Instead of fear, a crooked grin spread across Young-sung's face. He mocked the demons and fought as if nothing there posed any real threat. From that moment on, it was his restaurant, and everyone else were just guests. And if guests forgot how to behave, the owner was more than ready to teach them some manners. Young-sung wasn't used to fighting with weapons, but with improvised tools, he moved like a natural. A single chair was enough to show the demons they meant nothing here anymore, their respect level dropping faster than Twitter's reputation after an update. At times, it felt like he was having fun rather than fully locking in for a serious fight. Within minutes, every demon that had stormed the restaurant was knocked out cold. Now it was time to deal with the aftermath, since the place had turned into pure chaos. Spotting a cauldron lying on the floor, the master felt a strange, almost obsessive pull toward it. He wanted to take it, as if something special was hidden inside. A surviving demon tried to remind him that this territory belonged to the Bloodlord. According to the rules of this world, battles here were never meant to end. The former restaurant owner had gone through hell to obtain that adamantium cauldron, but it no longer belonged to him. The restaurant now had a new owner, one who had long dreamed of running his own place. From that moment on, he planned to cook great food here and spend his free time wiping out demons. Long ago, Young-sung had read that one of the great martial arts masters once ran a small cafe. Even though he originally came here only for combat, free time still needed filling. After a light renovation, the restaurant was renamed Kiri Kiri. If the former owner ever wanted it back, all he had to do was defeat the human. Until then, the new head chef finally got to work. Young-sung never forgot the words of his boss, who always said every hunter needed a hobby. It seemed this world still had plenty of ingredients that could be turned into something worthwhile. Compared to the previous planet, the selection here was noticeably wider. Though, to be fair, absolutely all the meat was soaked in poison. Young-sung hoped to find something tasty and sweet, but luck clearly wasn't on his side that day. It felt like the abyss simply didn't have non-poisonous nutrients at all. Still, since local toxins no longer affected him, he decided to start cooking anyway. During the process, Young-sung unexpectedly felt relaxed and genuinely happy. From that point on, his life split cleanly into two main activities. First, he fought demons, then he cooked to recover his strength and keep progressing. Several hundred years passed like that, and honestly, he even started to enjoy it. Every day at the same time, noisy visitors appeared outside the restaurant. By local law, they were required to challenge this human. They never got tired of fighting, as if experience points and likes were dropping at the same time. The outcome never changed, and the winner was always the same. Over time, Yongsung's muscles began unlocking new, unfamiliar potential. Divine martial arts kept evolving, accelerating the circulation of Kai. Because of that, he grew stronger and gained finer control over his body. Rumors claimed ancient martial masters trained so hard that they awakened magical talents. That kind of knowledge existed only in rare ancient books, usually seen only at auctions. Yongsung confirmed it firsthand when he felt powerful magic flowing through his fists. From that day on, fights became faster, and demons suffered far more serious damage. But such explosive growth came with a downside. His endless battles drew the attention of the constellation ruling this world. That much was obvious, since even an army of demons couldn't take down one human in 100 years. They stopped being a real threat, and the master's progress began to slow. He realized something had to change the moment the demons understood their strategy was useless. Even nutrients no longer boosted his growth. He needed to leave his comfort zone, but how to do that wasn't clear. Suddenly, Yongsung noticed that all battles were happening in enclosed spaces. The demons decided to lure him outside, surround him, and leave him no chance. That idea caught his interest, and he chose to play along. The master pretended not to notice anything and stepped outside like easy prey. Fired-up monsters rushed at him, dreaming of gouging out his eyes and tearing out his powerful heart. For many years, the demonic restaurant had been both his shelter and the reason for his stagnation. Now that the familiar walls no longer protected him, fighting demanded far more caution. Demons constantly attacked from behind, aiming for weak spots. Even heavy brutes appeared on the battlefield, ones that physically couldn't fit inside the restaurant before. They relied on brute force, completely ignoring the value of speed and agility. For the first few years, these fights paid off, and Yongsung's progress accelerated noticeably. But eventually, boredom crept in when even demons fought using the same script. They never changed tactics and acted far too predictably. Gradually, confidence began to overflow within the master. Long ago, the strongest martial artist on earth, Li Xiaowen, had spoken of this state. Back then, Yongsung didn't understand, but now, as an expert, he felt a strange and profound bliss. Before, he always felt like a cornered beast, like an antelope about to be caught by a lion. That feeling vanished, and for the first time, he could breathe freely. The world itself seemed to whisper that he was stronger than all the demons around him. Because of that, any opponent turned into nothing more than a light snack. After another victory, Yongsung decided to relax a bit and enjoy a good meal. Even without visible progress, simple pleasures still brought him satisfaction. That day, the demons went all out, trying to surprise him and break the usual fight script. They chained magic attacks, constantly shifted distance, and refused to let him lock onto a single target. Yongsung now had to track not just the ground, but the airspace around him as well. Even under those conditions, the human still sat at the top of this world's food chain. The harsher and more savage the assaults became, the tougher and more stable his body grew. With time, he became almost untouchable, and the battles themselves started losing meaning. Several more centuries passed, and Yongsung grew completely disillusioned with this world. At times, he even caught himself considering befriending monsters, since none of them posed real competition anymore. Anyone could now walk into the restaurant, eat in peace, and leave without trouble. Yongsung felt he had grown too close to these creatures, which meant he urgently needed a new challenge. His hunter card showed that he had reached a new level, one that would make him a true superstar on Earth. His skill card was filled with cryptic and terrifyingly complex terminology. While reviewing his abilities, Yongsung noticed the world itself beginning to resonate with his ki energy. This became possible after awakening divine abilities. Techniques of divine martial arts now formed the core of his arsenal. He learned to redirect enemy power through perfect harmony of body, mind, and energy. His invulnerability reached a stage where conventional weapons no longer posed any threat. The price for this was an absurd amount of time and effort. Time had always been the weak point of divine martial arts cultivation, but this path alone allowed the creation of Kai of the highest, nearly unreachable quality. After hundreds of thousands of years of training, Yongsung had long surpassed the strongest mages he once saw on television, their magic now looking like cheap stage tricks. As he approached the peak of existence, the world itself began sinking to the rhythm of his body. At that moment, Yongsung had no idea that this power would soon drive his homeworld Earth into madness. For the first time in Abyss history, a human was approaching the threshold of becoming a constellation. Without realizing it, he had already taken the first step toward that fate. Against this backdrop, the next few years passed relatively calmly and almost harmlessly. Battles became far less frequent as demons grew tired of endlessly healing their wounds. Most of the time, they came simply to eat, with conflicts breaking out only occasionally. If especially bloodthirsty and aggressive creatures appeared, the chef handled them quickly. One strike was now enough, no explanations required. When the restaurant emptied out, Yongsung sank back into heavy thoughts. Food and training no longer brought progress and had turned into monotonous routine. Yongsung firmly decided that he needed a truly powerful opponent. At that very moment, he had no idea that a special demon was already approaching the restaurant. Its slow, confident stride made one thing clear. Fear wasn't in its vocabulary. All monsters crossing its path instinctively scattered. The two greatest titans of this world met moments later. A single glance was enough to tell that this demon was nothing like the others. Its crushing aura of death pressed down like a truck on the shoulders. The demon calmly identified itself as Varagon and indicated it had come in peace. A quick stat analysis told Yongsung this was an opponent on a completely different level. He didn't buy the peace claim and quietly prepared for war. That day marked the beginning of a new phase in his training. It began without sudden moves, allowing him to study the mysterious guest. Yongsung prepared a dish, which the demon consumed without the slightest caution. After finishing the meal, Varagon pulled out something glowing intensely. It was a massive chunk of adamantium, worth more than all the money Yongsung had earned in his life combined. That was the demon's payment for the meal and the hospitality. After that, Varagon revealed that he was the first avatar of the Blood Lord. The constellation ruling this world had taken such an interest in a young man named Yongsung that it decided to make him a special offer. Varagon made it clear that Yongsung could become the avatar of the Blood constellation if he accepted every condition without hesitation. The demon was confident in success, convinced that only a lunatic would dare oppose a constellation's will. That confidence shattered when Yongsung calmly refused, as if offers like that showed up in his life every day. The monster instantly snapped, losing composure and lashing out with accusations of stupidity and ingratitude. In the same instant, the master felt a monstrous pressure crash down, enough to make even his knees tremble slightly. Varagon shifted to intimidation, pressure, and brute manipulation, trying to crush his will outright. He did everything possible to pull Yongsung to his side and serve the Blood Lord together while conquering new worlds. None of it worked, because Yongsung had long stopped fearing anyone. He calmly stated that he had already promised another constellation to become its avatar. Varagon had never heard anything like that in all his existence. In that moment, he decided the boy had simply been deceived and needed his eyes opened. Everyone in the Abyss knew that no constellation would ever sign a contract with a weak avatar. Real wars usually broke out over promising avatars, and the winning constellation guarded its warrior obsessively. Constellations constantly watched their avatars to prevent rivals from stealing them, since that happened all the time. The core law of the Abyss was to protect your avatar at any cost, and in the demon's view, Yongsung clearly didn't get that. Yongsung kept believing in the goddess of scales because she could see the future and knew what awaited his homeworld. Varagon admitted that such foresight was an incredibly rare gift, but one riddled with flaws. In response, Yongsung began recounting his insane training, trying to prove his point. He mentioned the magical storm and the years spent devouring toxic creatures. That was when the demon bluntly explained that magical storms could not be controlled. Most likely, the storm had simply carried him away, and the goddess of scales had permanently lost her avatar. Varagon pushed hard to make Yongsung finally accept this simple truth. He had been abandoned in the Abyss and now formally belonged to no constellation at all. No matter how much pressure Varagon applied, Yongsung refused to admit it out loud. Deep down, though, he already felt that everything about this situation was disturbingly off. For the first time in hundreds of thousands of years, the thought hit him that all those trainings might have been meaningless. Irritated and hollow, Yongsung stepped outside just to catch his breath. He felt like breaking down because he had never questioned these contradictions before. Now everything started clicking into place, and his own reflection looked pathetic and lost. Varagon sensed weakness and decided to restart the conversation from scratch. Yongsung no longer wanted to hear anything and kept insisting that he was going back to Earth. When words completely lost their weight, Varagon revealed his true berserker form. His body swelled instantly as the Blood Lord's blessing wrapped tightly around his flesh. He attacked without warning, clearly choosing to dominate the human through raw force. Yongsung hadn't faced an equal opponent in ages, and now that moment had finally arrived. After the very first clash, it was obvious that this would not be an easy win. Varagon surpassed him in experience and raw power, meaning victory would require intellect, not brute strength. They exchanged a rapid series of blows before heavy magic entered the fight. Condensed mana, known as Devil Rain, could effortlessly dissolve ordinary monsters. Varagon was certain the human would meet the same fate. But thanks to his invulnerability technique, Yongsong endured the hellish pain without melting into a pool of blood. An ordinary human could never even dream of such capability. During the opening minutes, he fought defensively, searching for weaknesses. Despite the overwhelming pressure, the master remained calm and ice-cold. Hundreds of thousands of years of training had pushed his awareness to an absolute peak. He felt no discomfort, as if this battlefield were his natural environment. He barely looked at his opponent, fighting as though the demon were merely a reflection of himself. The lunar step technique and precise Kai control elevated his martial mastery to a new tier. In that moment, he unlocked a terrifying speed, moving as if he didn't exist at all. Even the Bloodlord's avatar had never witnessed anything like it before. Until this moment, Yongsong believed martial arts were chosen only by those incapable of mastering magic. Even in the abyss, magical skills had always been the most sought-after path. The logic seemed simple: stack enough mana and channel it the right way. Compared to years of brutal training, magic truly looked like the faster and more profitable route. But only martial arts allowed one to break past all ranks and hard limits. Yongsong had spent an insane amount of time polishing his skills, and now his movements ran almost on autopilot. Despite the gap in raw levels, he felt certain he could win. Martial arts were what granted him the technique of invulnerability. Had he been a standard mage, he would have melted instantly upon contact with Devil Rain. Realizing his own strength only pushed his confidence higher. The moment had come to decide which of these two titans truly stood above the other. The next clash triggered a monstrous explosion that rolled across the entire planet. From the outside, it looked as if the gods themselves were fighting, tired of watching through their avatars. This was a duel from ancient eras, where magic collided head-on with martial arts. Until this day, mages had always emerged victorious, making this battle one for the history books. Yongsong was under extreme pressure as his opponent surpassed him in almost every stat. Yet, with every landed blow, the demon's advantage steadily melted away. The moment the master activated the Cosmic Fist technique, the odds instantly evened out. Varagon had never taken hits that devastating before, not even as a child when his father punished him for bad grades. To truly balance the scales, Yongsong had waited patiently for the perfect timing. Defensive techniques came first, allowing him to read every movement. Once Varagon's weaknesses became clear, Yongsong began hunting for the opening. By then, he had perfectly balanced Kai energy throughout his entire body. Every strike gathered power into a single point and detonated with near-nuclear force. In that moment, he resembled Li Xiaowan, the first human to redistribute internal energy flows. What Yongsong still hadn't realized was the real conclusion of this battle. He had surpassed Li Xiaowan long ago, more than 100 years back. His former idol now felt no more threatening than a warm-up dummy. At this very moment, Yongsong was fighting on equal footing with the chief avatar of a mighty constellation. He wasn't just taking control house, he was breaking Varagon from the inside out. The Blood Shield spell could no longer withstand the human's pressure. All defensive skills lost meaning, and the demon clearly panicked. Varagon gulped cold air greedily, trying to recover strength and regain control of the fight. In a final attempt to win, he unleashed a true hurricane of mana. Those destructive surges instantly drew the attention of every monster on the planet. None dared come closer, knowing that such power belonged only to the highest beings. Before their eyes, the human who had terrified them for centuries battled the constellation's main avatar. Having burned his last reserves, Varagon moved like a drunken master, lagging harder than a stream on weak Wi-Fi. In moments like this, only a magical artifact capable of cutting even invulnerable flesh could turn the tide. Yongsong had to stay razor-sharp because throwing away a near-certain victory would be pure stupidity. Before the decisive moment, even the Bloodlord sent his avatar the last remnants of power. Everything was done for one goal: to erase the human who dared challenge the rules. By now, Yongsong clearly understood he was in mortal danger. But thanks to his increased speed, he still managed to defend even against the sharpest attacks. He stayed one step ahead, moving like someone with absolutely nothing left to lose. The invulnerability technique had failed, and any mistake now meant death. He gathered every remaining drop of energy into a single point and prepared to end it. Cold calculation and steel resolve collided with pure aggression and brutality. Both went all in, wagering their lives on this final exchange. The master evaded at the perfect moment and delivered the finishing blow straight into his opponent's heart. In that instant, Yongsong seemed to expand, and even the demon couldn't immediately grasp what had just happened. Varagon screamed and panicked, making it painfully clear he had no backup plans left. At that exact second, a true tectonic shift tore through the master's consciousness. From that moment on, he would never be the same, as his inner energy flows shattered every known limit. Now the entire galaxy began to acknowledge his power and his genuinely terrifying potential. To Yongsong, everything felt blurred, as if seen through fog, and his body moved almost entirely on autopilot. Other constellations silently joined the battle as unseen observers, curious to see how it would end. All of them were stunned that a human walking the path of martial arts had reached such heights. Completely drained, Varagon finally admitted defeat. Choking on his own blood, he could no longer continue this insane slaughter. All that remained was to lie there and watch his opponent rise above the world itself. Defeating the Blood Lord's avatar instantly elevated Yongsong's status throughout the abyss. No one would ever dare call him a pathetic human wasting his life on useless skills again. As a final act, Varagon decided to share a few sincere words. He warned that if other constellations offered avatar contracts, they should be rejected immediately. Yongsong's focus now had to be locked solely on raising his own level. He no longer needed anyone, because he was capable of becoming the strongest constellation himself. Varagon urged him to fear no one, answer to no one, and one day, seize control of the entire abyss. At first it sounded absurd, but over time Yongsong felt that nothing was truly impossible. Once, he had been just an ordinary guy written off as a loser, the kind people laughed at before a sudden power patch. Now, he was defeating avatars and receiving offers from the constellations themselves. He wasn't fully convinced he could become a god, but the idea genuinely intrigued him. Yongsong promised himself to heed the demon's words and dare to challenge the strongest beings in the galaxy. After that, Varagon bid farewell and dissolved into the air like morning mist. Right after his level rose, the master began to feel different. He could now clearly sense the gazes of the constellations fixed on him. Their attention pressed down constantly, like an invisible weight on his shoulders. At first it was uncomfortable, but Yongsong soon accepted it as yet another challenge. Different constellations began inviting him to meetings and proposing cooperation. None of those gods left their own worlds fearing enemy invasions. Instead, they summoned him to places where they felt safe under the protection of their avatars. After his defeat, the Blood Lord immediately placed a bounty on the master's head. Demons from across the planet began converging, eager to fulfill their lord's will. Those fools never realized they could never reach his level. If they wanted another trip to the emergency ward, Yongsong was more than ready to provide the experience. As a new battle began, an old memory from Earth suddenly resurfaced. Back then, he and his friends had watched an interview with a hunter who had just become an avatar. Instead of celebrating, that hunter asked people not to envy his fate. According to him, being an avatar was far worse than it looked. It meant obeying orders and living by rules you never chose. At the time, Yongsong and his friends didn't understand and assumed the hunter had lost his mind. But after countless years, the master now saw everything from a completely different angle. He clearly understood that avatars never truly belong to themselves. Once given an order, they are forced to obey and have no right to refuse. Even knowing death awaits, they march forward stubbornly, like fans defending a doomed season of a show. After realizing all this, accepting the role of an avatar would be outright stupidity. If Yongsong had a chance to choose his own path and become a constellation, he had to take it. One of the constellations congratulated him on his victory and gifted him a piece of adamantium. Overflowing with excitement, the master vowed to do everything possible to one day become a constellation. Staying in this region no longer made sense. A new stage of progress was waiting ahead. Yongsong headed back to his favorite restaurant to retrieve the adamantium cauldron. He packed it together with his belongings and calmly prepared for another journey. Many constellations sent messages and even mocked him, but Yongsong didn't spare them a second of attention. He was more than happy to prove that even an ordinary human from Earth could rise into a constellation. While Yongsong fought and trained without end, the search for him never stopped for a single moment. In a god-forsaken galaxy where local monsters were dying of boredom, a flying angel named Ada Cavaniel appeared. He showed images of Yongsong, asking whether anyone had seen this human. The only responses he received were ridicule, insults, and outright cruel remarks. The angel wasn't used to such treatment, having always been considered an elite warrior of his constellation. Sensing hostility, he instinctively tightened his grip on his spear and prepared for combat. For more than 500,000 years, Adekvaniel had carried out every order of the Goddess of Scales. He had long grown accustomed to missions that bordered on the impossible. The angel never refused his duties and followed established rules without question. He beat monsters until they begged for mercy and apologized through tears. After that, he would calmly turn around and fly off, continuing his endless journey through the abyss. Long ago, he lost count of how many years he had spent searching. Avatars rarely left their territories, so many constellations grew interested in what was happening. For constellations trapped in their own worlds and bound by rigid laws, watching other constellations' avatars became a form of entertainment. They bombarded the angel with questions, trying to gauge how valuable an avatar the Goddess of Scales had lost. No one could understand why she had sent Adekvaniel on a mission that seemed doomed from the start. Meanwhile, Yongsong discovered an abandoned sector within the Bloodlord's territory. There were no annoying monsters here constantly interrupting his focus. Perfect training conditions granted rare moments of comfort and calm. Having reached the level of master, Yongsong pushed divine martial arts to a state where inner key energy stopped being the core factor. Put simply, he had reached the peak of martial arts. Beyond this point was endgame territory for those who broke the system. Even so, Yongsong continued refining specific techniques that once helped him defeat Varagon. No one knew what exactly he was aiming for or what goals drove him. Maybe he wanted to perfect his techniques, or maybe he simply enjoyed the process itself. Living at his own rhythm allowed the power of his very existence to keep growing. Soon, he unlocked the title of Invincible Master of Training, pushing him closer to becoming a full-fledged constellation. He still didn't know how to achieve it, but the destination was now clear. After a few months, monsters eventually found his hideout and tried to start another fight. The outcome didn't change, except this time, Yongsong beat them without even looking. He left behind nothing but broken bodies. To stop the constellations from pestering him, Yongsong decided to head toward the most distant worlds. Silence and peace ruled there, until the ground suddenly began to quake. Massive slabs of stone split apart, and a monster emerged from beneath the surface. Yongsong tensed instantly, sensing yet another battle approaching. The creature roared and prepared to strike like a cornered cobra. Then the master's eyes widened in surprise. He had seen this monster before. Standing before him was Onyx, now even larger and more massive after all these years. They rushed into an embrace, reliving the days spent near the poisoned ocean. Onyx hadn't wasted time and had managed to build a full family. It felt like they would reunite, live together, and crush enemies side by side once again. Their joy didn't last long, as a savage roar of this world's boss echoed from the depths. Against that presence, Onyx and his children looked tiny and helpless. A supergiant monster that had never surfaced before finally emerged purely for entertainment. Estimating this creature's level was impossible. It existed far beyond familiar scales. The system alerted the Master of Training that the entity before him was a 9-headed hydra preparing to attack. While Yongsong wandered across galaxies, he had unknowingly drawn the attention of more and more constellations. Some constellations were merely curious about how his journey would end, while others genuinely wished for his death. The Bloodlord did not forgive the humiliation and decided to erase the enemy before he reached absolute greatness. He contacted the 9-headed Hydra and promised it an entire planet in exchange for killing the human. The massive beast attacked without warning, aiming to catch Yongsong completely off guard. It felt like being slammed by a speeding truck that had no intention of slowing down. Colossal pressure crashed down on the Master of Training, who had barely recovered from his long journey. Snapping back into focus, Yongsong understood that he either defeated this monster or lost his dream forever. The decision came instantly, and he challenged the near-immortal creature head-on. For years, the Hydra had tormented Onyx and his entire family. This monster had earned brutal punishment, and today, no one was coming to save it. Launching himself off the ground with explosive force, Yongsong surged forward and activated stone fists. A single blow was enough to tear one of the vile heads clean off. The remaining heads of the Hydra roared, and Yongsong felt victory was closer than it looked. That confidence shattered when the severed head instantly regenerated. That was exactly why the Hydra was known as an almost immortal existence. The constellations knew this monster had a weakness, yet no one had ever found it. Beyond its horrifying regeneration, the Hydra wielded poisonous breath. Normally, that was enough to poison any enemy and casually turn them into barbecue, content that gets a channel banned in under a minute. But a man who had lived on poison for years endured it without issue. After a brief pause, Yongsong ignited with energy and began tearing through the monster's heads without mercy. He had no clear plan in that moment, fighting purely on rage and conviction, proving his power demanded respect. He wasn't cornered, though for a split second, doubt still flickered. Every strike cost the Hydra another head, yet victory remained distant. Strategy had to change and defense could not be ignored. It became clear that the Hydra was far stronger than Varagon. Calmly blocking attacks was no longer an option. It was time to counter. Using speed, Yongsong slipped between poisonous assaults, constantly closing the distance. Time seemed to slow, and he began noticing things the Hydra's previous enemies never had. The monster suffered from poor endurance and couldn't sustain peak threat levels for long. Every burst of poison drained massive amounts of energy and demanded recovery time. The severing technique dealt additional damage, and the Hydra screamed even louder. Fighting a creature like this forced Yongsong to draw critical conclusions. He no longer felt like an ordinary human bound by fear and limits. Something greater awakened within him, what the Abyss calls Essence Force. This was the very power that allowed constellations to rule the Abyss. With it, they built kingdoms and bound avatars to their will. As long as a constellation possessed enough Essence Force, almost nothing was forbidden. When Yongsong touched this power, even the Hydra's attacks stopped bothering him. Breaking the monster's will was nearly impossible, and he realized it wasn't necessary. His true goal had always been self-growth and deepening his own power. He turned and shot away, rapidly creating distance and speed. Gathering enough energy within himself, Yongsong initiated cultivation. All that remained was to direct that energy at his enemy. It felt like an unavoidable blade, impossible to block. The Hydra was used to ignoring wounds, instantly regrowing lost heads. But when its body was struck by Kai energy, regeneration began to fail. In that moment, the monster received a death sentence with no appeal. Each new attack stripped away another head, and this couldn't go on forever. Sensing its own weakness, the beast tried to flee to a safe place. It was pure panic, exposing a shattered will and a broken spirit. All that remained was to finish off the wounded beast and spare it any further suffering. Reaching maximum speed, the master compressed all his power into a single point and unleashed the decisive strike. An explosion thundered out, loud enough to be heard across neighboring galaxies, with the same energy as a new Marvel trailer. Over the top, cinematic, and impossible to ignore. A blinding flash nearly took out Onyx and his entire family. When the dust finally settled, one thing was clear. Yongsong survived even after severe poisoning. Any further progress in this fight no longer mattered. He had reached the absolute peak. With the monster no longer a problem, it was finally time to deal with food supplies. For years, Onyx had told his family about a deranged human obsessed with poisonous meat. He assumed Yongsong had long abandoned that habit, but that was naive even by Abyss standards. After several hours of non-stop butchering, all that remained of the Hydra was a cold skeleton. The meat was cut into clean, perfect portions, enough stock to last for years. After the battle, Onyx decided to thank his friend for saving him from the Hydra. He gifted an artifact known as the Necklace of Space. Inside this necklace, massive amounts of food and items could be stored. Once activated, the artifact absorbed anything designated for storage. The meat would no longer spoil, and all accumulated adamantium could be preserved as well. Yongsong hadn't forgotten his old dream of forging the perfect set of cutlery. From the moment he decided to become a constellation, Yongsong began seeing the stats of all surrounding beings. The reason he could use the Necklace of Space wasn't just because he had grown stronger. The real reason was that he had reached the peak of cultivation and even begun to hear the world speaking to him. As another gift, he received unrefined orichalcum, a metal that radiated pure energy. Orichalcum released energy while adamantium absorbed it. These two materials felt made for each other and would help forge ideal cutlery. Onyx had to explain to his family not to pay attention to this human, the kind of guy who gets banned from chat in the first 10 seconds. The Necklace of Space absorbed most of the meat. Whatever remained had to be eaten quickly, or it would spoil. Onyx stared at his friend, unable to understand how Yongsong was still alive. To be clear, Hydra meat couldn't be compared to that of ordinary poisonous monsters. This creature hadn't become an avatar out of pride. Its power was already absurd. The master had never dealt with an ingredient like this before, so maximum caution was required. Yongsong felt that such a meal would grant him even more energy, and still chose to take the risk. The cooking process began, complex, dangerous, and strangely ceremonial. Yongsong even convinced Onyx to share the meal with him. No matter how much Onyx resisted, no one listened anymore. The stone monster paused, took a heavy breath, and did what had to be done. One serving was enough to feel a raging fire explode inside. passing constellations didn't even realize what had happened here. From the outside, it looked like a nuclear warhead had detonated and wiped everything nearby. Strangely enough, Onyx felt great and didn't feel close to dying at all. He thanked his friend, who by then was already calling himself the Abyss's head chef. After that, the entire family of stone serpents chose to place their full trust in the master of training. At that moment, Yongsong began to glow and slowly rise above the ground. He became a constellation, and with the appearance of his first followers, his power started growing rapidly. He didn't fully understand what was happening yet, but the sensation clearly felt good. It finally became clear why evil constellations fought so viciously over Earth. A world with billions of followers meant power, resources, and control over the Abyss. The next few days were not easy as Onyx adjusted to the changes. The stone serpent grew so massive that he now resembled an entire mountain. They were enjoying life until Yongsong received an interesting offer from another constellation. Yet another alliance of weaklings with no strength and no future. The Mistress of Wishes invited him for a visit, and Yongsong decided to accept the offer. Onyx warned that demons lived within the Mistress of Wishes domain, and that staying sharp there was mandatory. Honestly, Yongsong felt no nerves at all. After his recent battles, fear had stopped existing for him. He had already defeated the deadly Varagon and then clashed with the Hydra, a monster believed immortal for centuries. That was why he accepted the invitation with interest, especially since he wanted to learn more about the fate of his homeworld Earth. If he truly planned to return home, interacting with other constellations was unavoidable anyway. Upon arriving on the planet of wishes, Yongsong immediately noticed the sheer number of demons. They looked nothing like the monsters he had fought before. These were calm, sometimes even friendly beings who respectfully addressed him as master. They invited him to follow them and meet the ruling constellation of this world in person. Everything around looked almost too clean and pleasant, like a beautifully wrapped trap that never lets you leave. But after such massive growth, Yongsong feared little and judged that no real danger awaited him here. While walking through the world of wishes, he learned that local demons gained power in a completely different way. They didn't need to fight or kill other beings to grow stronger. These demons were called succubi, creatures that fed on desires and dreams. If a succubus went too long without absorbing desire energy, it slowly lost its mind. The whole concept sounded strange, yet Yongsong felt no threat and stayed composed. Instead, his own endless desire to train and grow stronger drew countless glances. Even so, not a single succubus dared approach a guest personally invited by the mistress herself. After crossing the world, Yongsong finally stood before an enormous palace. The moment he stepped inside, a strange energy surged through his body. Despite his confidence, Yongsong never dropped his guard and carefully observed his surroundings. Still, upon reaching the main hall, he felt as if he had just woken up. It turned out the entire journey had been an illusion, and from the very beginning, he had been standing in this room. However, this wasn't a trap or an attempt on his life. It was here that he first saw the Mistress of Wishes, who looked like a small kindergarten-age girl. During their exchange, she immediately realized that Yongsong was no longer an ordinary human. He had already become a constellation and could now speak on equal footing with the ancient beings of the Abyss. The Mistress of Wishes acted friendly and gladly answered all of his questions. She explained that she had invited Yongsong to propose joining a military alliance. Lately, the Abyss had grown unstable, and many constellations were forming alliances for safety. Endless wars drained even gods, and without reliable partners, it was easy to lose territory. Yongsong still didn't have a planet of his own, as all his focus was on protecting Earth. He quickly realized that joining the alliance would help safeguard his homeworld. When war reached Earth, every possible defensive measure would be needed. On top of that, the Mistress of Wishes could help him return home, which mattered more than anything else right now. Yongsong made it clear that he was interested in cooperation and ready to join the alliance of weaker constellations. He had always liked supporting those below him, seeing it as genuine justice. The Mistress of Wishes could have kept him by her side forever, slowly feeding on his dreams. But she deliberately refused, because an alliance was far more profitable. Besides, the Master of Training radiated a strange aura of desire, far removed from conquest or domination. His interests were limited to training, growing stronger, and protecting his home planet. In that moment, she understood that he was truly special, and that losing such an ally would be a mistake. After agreeing, Yongsong asked what responsibilities Alliance members carried. The question itself sounded almost absurd since constellations were known as lazy beings. In response, the Mistress of Wishes laughed. like she had just heard North Korea was about to win the World Cup. She explained that the alliance only activated during large-scale wars. Until then, its members were free to relax and live without worry. And just like that, Yongsung officially joined the Alliance of Constellations. He felt that together with them, entirely new horizons and limits would open before him. Immediately after the alliance was sealed, an unexpected guest arrived, a kitten made of lava and magma. It turned out to be yet another constellation from that very same alliance of underdogs. The moment Yongsung saw the kitten, doubt started creeping into his mind. He had just joined an alliance made up of a little girl and a cat. The lineup wasn't stronger and looked like a startup with no funding and zero future. Yongsung hoped there were other members, but reality shut that idea down fast. He was bluntly told this was the full roster, since no one wanted to get involved with losers. Backing out was no longer an option. The contract was signed, and there was no undo button. All that remained was to accept the situation and rely on support from a cat and a child. As a small consolation, the Mistress of Wishes decided to give Yongsung a modest gift. She handed him a martial arts scroll containing vampirism techniques along with ingots of orichalcum. This was meant to expand his combat arsenal and give him an edge in future battles. By this point, Yongsung had already accumulated plenty of adamantium along with orichalcum. Upon hearing that, the lava and magma kitten immediately offered friendly assistance. It confidently claimed it could melt those materials and forge absolutely any weapon. An unbreakable adamantium shield and the strongest sword in the universe would have suited the invincible master of training perfectly. Instead, Yongsung asked for ordinary kitchen utensils. At first, the kitten thought it was a joke, but Yongsung looked dead serious. He explained that besides training, he wanted to cook proper meals to restore spent energy. After that, the kitten refused to continue talking to this lunatic and instantly returned to its territory. Everyone could now mind their own business until a military conflict broke out. The Mistress of Wishes explained that Yongsung could ask her anything, and she would always help. If he needed information about other constellations or the secrets of the abyss, all he had to do was ask. She also revealed that not all constellations gained divine power through progression. The Mistress of Wishes herself was born a constellation and never walked a path of brutal training. Most constellations inherited their power from their ancestors. In the abyss, cases where an ordinary being ascends to godhood are extremely rare. Yongsung was one of the rarest examples of such a path. That meant many would look down on him and even try to erase him. He would have to be ready for constant battles to defend his right to power. When he finally acknowledged himself as a constellation, the world around him began to shift. A tremendous force surged from the depths of the abyss and illuminated the master of training. He gained true authority, and his appearance changed instantly. Long white hair fell over his shoulders, and his eyes shone brighter than any star in the galaxy. At the same time, in a neighboring galaxy, a battle between two avatars was unfolding. An angel fought a massive monster in a fight to the death. One mistake could cost a life, so every move was calculated to perfection. Suddenly, both avatars received a notification that the invincible master of training was watching them. Yongsung saw the battle as if he were standing right beside them. That was when he understood how constellations had observed his past fights. He felt different, as if he had crossed a line between life and something greater. Now, he had to think about creating his own avatars and expanding his influence in the abyss. Before, he might not have realized his true nature, but that excuse no longer held. Without his own avatars, real progress was impossible. Then Yongsung remembered that he already had his first followers. Onyx and his entire family had sworn to serve him for the rest of their lives. That meant the foundation was already laid, and the journey could continue. The kitten and the Mistress of Wishes promised to advise him and warn him against shady contracts. They also warned that other constellations would soon begin hunting him. These would no longer be isolated attacks like before. The moment a real threat was sensed, his enemies would unite to destroy him. Realizing this, Yongsung immediately thought of his home planet. The Mistress of Wishes already knew about Earth and had heard that a war would soon erupt over it. While evil constellations hadn't yet reached that galaxy, Yongsung still had time to prepare. For now, they were only observing humanity and evaluating its potential. Monsters had already begun appearing, offering hunters contracts. It resembled a clash of weaker constellations that had reached Earth first. But once the true Titans arrived, everything would change. Yongsung had to return to Earth and protect the planet from their invasion. The Mistress of Wishes agreed to help chart a route, though Earth's exact coordinates were still unknown. Before the journey, the Master of Training decided to return to a familiar appearance. He cut his long hair and once again felt like the same guy with big dreams. It was time to say goodbye, even though the Alliance members would stay in touch. They wished Yongsong luck and genuinely hoped he would reach his goal no matter what. Before finally setting course for Earth, a few critical points still had to be clarified. Yongsong was strongly advised to hide the fact that he had become a constellation and avoid drawing attention on his home planet. If he made too much noise right away, other constellations would instantly issue challenges, and everything would end in a blood-soaked mess. Hostile beings would sense the threat and do everything possible to leave the master with zero chances. A far smarter move was to lie low and temporarily play the role of an ordinary hunter. That would allow him to quietly build up avatars, expand his power, and prepare for the decisive battle for Earth. By the time the evil constellations realized who he truly was, it would already be too late. Yongsong also admitted honestly that he had already made contact with one of the constellations. Remembering that story felt a bit awkward, so he decided to polish the details just a little. He started from the beginning, describing how the goddess of scales appeared to him in a dream. Yongsong kept the story short and retold everything in simple, grounded terms. He tried to make himself look decent, but his friends still called the whole thing nonsense. Credibility on the level of a get-rich-in-a-week influencer. They only reinforced the fear that Yongsong had simply gotten lost in the abyss due to a magical storm. None of them had ever heard of the goddess of scales, making that constellation nearly impossible to track down. It was decided to head toward regions of the universe where benevolent constellations were more common. Most likely, Earth was somewhere in that direction, the place the Master was so desperate to return to. At the same time, he had to keep training non-stop, since a clash with the evil titans of his galaxy was inevitable. To speed up his growth even a little, Yongsong met once again with a succubus named Aruni. She led him to a special place where only the strongest could achieve real progress. At first glance, it was just an ordinary well from which one needed to draw cold water. In truth, it was the Well of Enlightenment, and the task was simply to drink some of its water. If it were truly that easy, it would never have been called the most difficult trial on the planet. The stronger one's desire to draw the water, the heavier every movement became. Desires themselves dragged the water downward, making the lift nearly impossible. Meditation and attempts to distract the mind brought no relief and didn't make things easier. The only way to pass the trial was to completely suppress all desires and become detached. Even someone like Yongsong had weaknesses: good food, books, and yet another Batman reboot nobody asked for. At one point, he managed to suppress those urges only for a new problem to appear immediately. His former girlfriend appeared before him, the one he had lost due to endless training. She promised a fresh start, but Yongsong didn't buy into the illusion. Step by step, he began overcoming his own desires, and the training noticeably accelerated. If he truly wanted to become the strongest constellation, he would have to discard every weakness without exception. His allies watched closely, since no one had ever managed to draw water from this well. They felt that this was someone special, perhaps the first to ever touch the power of the Tao. The Mistress of Wishes even suggested that only mortals who had become constellations could achieve such a feat. Yongsong himself treated lifting the water like regular gym sets and didn't assign any special meaning to it. It was said that many demons had gone insane trying to complete this kind of training. Several days had already passed, yet Yongsong remained perfectly sane and continued the trial. His own desires kept tempting him non-stop, but meditation helped him stay locked in total awareness. Over time, weaknesses and temptations stopped interfering and instead turned into extra motivation to keep moving forward. He used them like fuel, growing stronger and stripping away vulnerabilities step by step. No living being can fully abandon desire, which is why lifting the water from the well to the very end is impossible. Even so, this was enough for Yongsong to greatly loosen his attachment to earthly comforts. In his spare time, he continued training with Aruni, steadily sharpening his martial skill. After several weeks of non-stop preparation, it was finally time to see what the lava and magma kitten was capable of. During that time, it had forged kitchen tools from legendary orichalcum. The items glowed with violet mana, as if they were eager to jump into battle and prove their worth. The Master of Training was genuinely thrilled. A single touch of the knife was enough to tell it was a true artifact. He decided to swing the blade a bit to feel its magical response. His friends immediately branded him a fool who had no idea how to handle weapons. Classic case of power maxed, brain still loading. After that, it was time to test the other items forged from adamantium. Even the strongest strike shouldn't leave a scratch, since this metal was famed for absolute durability. The Master of Training gathered all his inner energy into one point and unleashed a devastating blow. Darkness swallowed everything as smoke and dust filled the area. After a brief pause, it became clear. The adamantium had passed the test. The lava and magma kitten had done an excellent job and earned sincere praise. With that, Yongsung wrapped up his small training camp in the world of nightmares. He had arrived here as an ordinary human and left as a powerful constellation. A few days before departure, he decided to cook his favorite dish and treat his friends. None of them had ever tasted Hydra meat, and they immediately assumed he was trying to poison them. But Yongsung found the right words and still managed to convince them to try his delicacy. The constellations refused, but Aruni decided to take the risk and satisfy her long-standing hunger. Everyone around was already saying their goodbyes, convinced she wouldn't survive. Seconds later, it became clear Aruni had never eaten anything so delicious. She immediately called the others over and offered to share the delicacy. That was exactly why the local monsters didn't want to let the best chef in the abyss leave. They promised to remember his dishes and forever praise his culinary talent. Now, a long journey awaited him, the search for his home planet, Earth. Along the way, constellations eager to test his strength were bound to appear. It was the perfect chance to keep preparing and grow even stronger. At that very moment, he was heading toward a distant galaxy where a planet shrouded in darkness and a grim aura awaited. Its ruler was known as the Herald of Plague and clearly wanted to turn the master into his slave. The Herald of Plague sent an avatar to negotiate with the wandering hunter. In his trademark calm arrogance, Yongsung made it clear that he considered himself the strongest among constellations. It sounded bold and provocative, and the response came as a flood of furious outrage. The constellations of the abyss were prepared for scenarios like this. They had existed for millions of years. The moment conflict arose, the world's entire skeleton army was instantly placed on combat alert. Yongsung chose not to drag things out and struck first without wasting time on words. The army that believed itself invincible quickly ran into a problem with no solution. They couldn't stop the invincible Master of Training and were forced to call their master. The Herald of Plague declared war on Yongsung and vowed to personally take his head. A clash between two constellations was about to begin, exactly what was needed. Even after falling into the abyss, Yongsung had never been seen as a force worth fearing. He had been a weak human, used to struggling against a hostile world, but everything changed once he became a constellation. Now, thousands of eyes were fixed on him, trying to grasp the limits of his power. Doubt still restrained his movements, but little by little he realized his true strength. At this point, even his friends couldn't have stopped him. Yongsung craved battle. He was done hiding and pretending to fear anyone. From that moment on, Yongsung decided to wipe out every constellation that dared stand in his way back home. The Mistress of Wishes and the kitten warned him more than once that clashes between constellations almost always ended in serious trouble. The Master of Training ignored them, and very soon someone appeared whom even the dead feared. A mid-rank constellation known as the Herald of Plague arrived in person to punish the insolent human. Local monsters couldn't hide their joy when they saw their master finally come to protect them. The Herald of Plague himself had never faced an opponent this unhinged. Before him stood an ordinary-looking guy challenging a constellation for no clear reason, and that mystery felt deeply unsettling. Normally, everyone in the abyss acted with extreme caution, afraid to make even a single wrong move. If a constellation didn't feel absolute confidence, it would never strike first. That was because every constellation feared losing its territory and followers. They preferred to hide on their home planets, staying in the safe zone and avoiding risk at all costs. But Yongsung had never cared about rules and chose to act the way his instincts demanded. Without ceremony or hesitation, he surged forward, aiming to deliver a crushing blow. The planet trembled from the impact, as if a massive tsunami had slammed into a defenseless continent. For the Master, this was a true constellation-level battle, one that could define his future. He knew that victory would grant him final confidence in his own invincibility. Compressing all his inner energy into a single point, Yongsung unleashed the strike that earned him the title of the Invincible Master. When the Herald of Plague felt the destructive vibration rip through his body, it was already too late to react. The massive monster screamed in agony, feeling its own vulnerability for the first time. Even the Alliance constellations had no idea how to comment on what they were seeing. It seemed they had been incredibly lucky to ally with a human whose power the entire abyss had underestimated. The Herald of Plague felt weak and humiliated for the first time in his existence, right in front of his own avatars. Realizing defeat, he began frantically searching for any way out of the situation. An unknown force from the depths of the galaxy was tearing his very essence apart. The avatars didn't dare interfere, having never seen such a thoroughly prepared opponent. The Herald of Plague lost his first battle, and now the question was survival or annihilation. He accepted humiliation and surrendered publicly before his followers. The fear-shaking skeleton was ready to do anything to avoid total destruction. The Mistress of Wishes and the kitten had heard legends about this monster, and couldn't believe how pathetic he turned out to be. Fear could break even the mightiest constellations of this galaxy? Yongsong agreed to spare him, and in that instant felt a massive surge of power and energy. The entire planet, along with its avatars, automatically fell under his control. It felt strangely pleasant as streams of mana flowed through his body like a warm drink on a cold night. The Kingdom of Plague was now under his rule, but calling it good news would have been a stretch. The planet was filled with grotesque monsters, a toxic atmosphere, and suffocating stench. Even standing there was exhausting, making the best option to leave this world as fast as possible. Earth was far too distant to waste time in this hellish place. Yongsong returned the planet to the Herald of Plague and said goodbye as if they were old acquaintances. Never before had a constellation acted so illogically. Everyone knew that in battles between constellations, both sides risked everything. The victor normally stripped the loser of all power to eliminate future threats. Erasing the enemy's existence entirely was standard practice. But Yongsong didn't care. He felt invincible and feared no stab in the back. As if nothing special had happened, he left the Kingdom of Plague and continued searching for Earth. From that point on, every new planet became a harsh trial. He had to constantly adapt to new monsters and clash with yet more constellations. A massive horned demon also believed it could easily subdue the arrogant human. A few hours later, Yongsong had completely erased it from existence. His fame spread rapidly through every corner of the abyss. In some worlds, within days, everyone already knew that the invincible master of training was approaching. At first, people openly mocked him and happily accepted every challenge he threw out. But after this guy erased several constellations in a row, attitudes shifted. Caution replaced laughter, and respect followed close behind. He cut through constellations like a hot knife through butter, never slowing down for even a second. It felt as if he didn't sense danger at all and was genuinely enjoying these battles. His allies knew they had hit the jackpot by signing a lifetime pact with him. Nothing could threaten them now. Whenever things went sideways, the invincible master of training showed up. In rare moments of peace, he liked to cook a proper dinner and let himself dream a little. Returning home felt almost like a fairy tale, and he replayed that moment in his mind again and again. One such evening, a strange portal opened before him, as if deliberately calling him inside. Yongsong wasn't the type to refuse gifts from fate and stepped into the unknown without hesitation. Seeing green grass, towering mountains, and a clear blue sky made his heart skip. It looked way too much like home. For a few seconds, he couldn't believe the journey might finally be over and the goal reached. But once he descended from the mountains and reached the nearest settlement, the smile vanished from his face. This wasn't Earth, but a world inhabited by goblins for decades. The planet was called Ephes, a place known as a true goblin paradise. The goblins themselves looked friendly and showed no sign of aggression. Only later did Yongsong realize that this race had long faced a far more terrifying enemy. A massive portal tore open in the sky, clearly signaling the arrival of an abyssal titan. When enormous fangs emerged from the rift, jokes ended and the goblins scattered in panic. The screams and chaos unsettled Yongsong despite his flawless combat state. Before him appeared a gigantic, many-eyed wolf, a devourer of entire planets. Its name was Lupus, and it had come to turn the goblin settlement into lunch. Charging toward the monster on his wyvern flew the goblin king Odaigon. He wasn't used to surrendering without a fight and refused to hide while his homeworld was at risk. However, the king clearly overestimated himself and nearly became easy prey. Only a blinding flash of light allowed him to dodge the massive snow-white fangs. The wolf growled, trying to lure the unseen opponent out of the shadows. Stepping forward came the invincible master of training, ready to accept yet another challenge. Yongsong instantly felt that this world resembled Earth too closely, and it hit him harder than expected. He couldn't stand by and watch kind goblins be slaughtered by a single predator, so he chose to intervene. Before striking, memories of all his past opponents flashed through his mind. Due to the lack of real battles, most abyssal constellations had an extremely low pain tolerance. They weren't used to true combat and broke apart at the first serious wounds. The wolf was destroyed with a single blow. Even the lava and magma kitten hadn't expected that outcome. Recent training had turned Yongsung into a being capable of ignoring the very laws of the universe. He was about to leave this world, but the stunned goblins wouldn't let him go. They surrounded their savior, watching his every move without blinking. In the next moment, the Goblin King dropped to his knees and swore to serve him for life. The rest of the goblins followed suit, and the master's number of followers surged. The consciousness of the abyss responded instantly, flooding his body with power and boosting his stats. Yongzong felt his authority expand, his influence within the abyss becoming tangible. He rose to the rank of a mid-tier constellation, and no one would dare call him weak anymore. On his home planet, a move like this would never have worked. Save humanity that dramatically, and they'd make him a global superstar, then cancel him on social media a week later. Humans would never serve someone for life. They think very differently. Yongsong decided not to linger in the goblin world and continued his search for Earth. Odaigon, often called Gon, didn't want to let his savior go. He sincerely declared his wish to serve him for life and promised help in any difficult situation. This goblin had impressive stats and could genuinely prove useful. And lately, Yongsong had been feeling lonely, so having reliable company didn't seem like a bad idea at all. From that moment on, their shared journey through uncharted worlds and distant galaxies truly began. Yongsong kept pushing his stats higher, while each new battle cranked the intensity up another notch. He no longer wasted time on avatars, choosing to challenge only the strongest beings of the abyss. His next opponent was a savage, seven-headed dragon known as Org. The massive dragon tried to tear him apart, relying purely on overwhelming physical power. Yongsong slipped past every strike with ease, always staying one step ahead and reading the enemy's moves. At some point, he clearly felt someone watching him from the shadows. Instead of one opponent, another monster emerged out of nowhere, the planet devourer Vulcan. The colossal bear joined forces with the dragon to stop the arrogant outsider who had entered their galaxy uninvited. Powerful monsters hate when someone interferes on their turf and disrupts the established order. Yongsong had to sweat for real, and at one moment his body was suddenly locked in total immobility. The cause was a web released by the Lord of the Spatial Cave, the Spider Adio. A guy who only wanted a bit of training suddenly found himself in a genuinely critical situation. The dragon, the bear, and the spider completely cut off all escape routes, but surrender was still not an option. Digging deep, Yongsong tore them apart one by one and stacked their corpses like trophies. His stats skyrocketed once again, and he could clearly feel the abyss acknowledging his power. After that, he decided to cook some quality meat to quickly restore the energy he had burned. Over the years spent in the abyss, he had become a true master of culinary delicacies made from dangerous ingredients. Evenings like these were never boring, since Mr. Gon was always nearby, the only one who never betrayed him or asked for a cut. Today, the goblin was about to experience just how good poisonous monster meat could taste. He paused, cautiously sniffed the steak, then finally decided to take the risk. The meat instantly flooded the goblin's body with pure energy extract, making him shine brighter than any star. With just a single bite, Gon jumped to a completely new level and boosted all his base stats. He had never tasted anything better, and from that moment was ready to give his life for just one more serving of that steak. But despite these fun evenings, Yongsong almost never truly smiled. He felt how deeply he missed his home, Earth, and wanted to return as soon as possible. That was why they never stayed anywhere long, quickly packing up and continuing the search for Earth. Yongsong believed that after hundreds of years wandering the abyss, he would still find his warm, familiar home. While traveling through galaxies, they suddenly stumbled into an extremely unpleasant situation. Right before their eyes, a massive chunk of land the size of an entire continent was erased in a single instant. The magical storm was especially violent, and the goblin felt his knees start to shake. Yongsong told his companion to calm down and confidently assured him that everything would be fine. All that was needed was to take a few steps forward and fully trust the unknown force. Even though it looked insane, the master of training acted with such certainty that doubting him was impossible. A gigantic black portal opened before them, with not a single living soul around. As always, Yongsong loved quests like this and stepped inside without hesitation. Strangely enough, at that exact same moment, an identical portal appeared on his home planet, Earth. If such a dungeon isn't cleared in time, monsters break out, and humanity faces serious trouble. That's why special hunter squads are dispatched immediately to conduct emergency raids. Right now, a hunter team called Guns was heading toward the U.S. state of Texas. The team was led by Richard Parker, the son of an influential businessman who started his path not in dungeons, but with a golden pass. They had long cooperated with local authorities, making the world just a bit safer. Ever since magic and monsters entered Earth, people had forgotten what a peaceful life looked like. Using monster cores, humanity created an eco-friendly energy source with magical potential. The new world challenged humanity, and step by step they adapted to the new rules of survival. Biology and many other sciences advanced rapidly, largely thanks to the pharmaceutical giant Parker Industries. Richard had long sought to surpass his father's achievements and prove his own worth. At the moment, he was only a mid-rank hunter, but many predicted a great future for him. Together with his professional squad, they had arrived today to clear yet another dungeon. According to preliminary calculations, it was an ordinary low-level portal, not expected to cause any serious problems. If everything went according to plan, the perimeter would be cleared within a few hours, clean and painless. Richard knew this was easy money, another step closer to his long-cherished dream. He even brought a personal gear carrier along, so nothing would distract him during the monster cleanup. The confident squad entered the dungeon calmly, as if heading out for a casual walk on a warm beach. None of them had the slightest idea that real hell would break loose in just a few minutes. The moment the portal sealed shut, the dungeon erupted in crimson flashes, making the air vibrate with dread. It became obvious that a breach had occurred, and the dungeon itself had shifted its rank. What was supposed to be low-tier content instantly turned into a survival run straight out of hell. There was no way to warn them anymore. All that remained was to hope someone would make it out alive. Meanwhile, Richard and his team had no clue the situation had spiraled out of control. They moved forward carefully, scanning their surroundings as the sharp smell of sulfur filled the air. Suddenly, one of the assistants screamed in panic, nearly calling out for his mom in terror. The reason was an army of the dead, long starved and slowly rising from the darkness. The association representative immediately rushed to report the incident to headquarters. He also demanded immediate contact with the Parker Foundation to warn them of unforeseen circumstances. Before the monsters fully engaged, the gun squad had already pushed deeper into the dungeon. This world was called the Illusion of Chaos, though everything happening here was painfully real. At first, silence ruled the area, allowing Richard and his team to scout without interference. They wandered among ancient ruins like archaeologists exploring forgotten Egyptian tombs. It was crucial to remember that the dungeon had only two exits. The first was retreating through the portal, the second was killing the local boss. Since the portal vanished the moment they entered, only the boss fight remained along with blind hope. If the monsters had stayed low level, this wouldn't have been a serious problem. But the dungeon had shifted ranks, and now the creatures were far stronger and far deadlier. At first, the hunters didn't panic, assuming the enemies were just ordinary undead. They had dealt with similar monsters before and never struggled much. Everything went wrong the moment the monsters stopped reacting to magical attacks. The undead didn't care at all. They felt no pain and kept advancing non-stop. Their numbers grew by the minute, and panic began spreading through the squad. Even a veteran team that had cleared dozens of dungeons now faced a real threat. Everyone waited for Richard to say something decisive, but the young leader stayed silent for too long. In the end, he delivered a motivational push and sent everyone forward. Confidence was there. A plan was not. Classic move. He believed an aggressive strategy would quickly crush the stinking undead. That turned out to be a fatal mistake as the monsters kept multiplying by the minute. It soon became obvious that continuing the fight was pointless, and the squad began considering retreat. Meanwhile, several miles away from the epicenter, everything remained eerily calm. Suddenly, a strange abyssal energy activated a portal from which two figures emerged. It was a goblin and the master of training stepping in to accept a new challenge. They quickly surveyed the area and immediately realized other beings were nearby. The smell alone told the goblin everything. He had sensed it before. He activated his flight technique to scan the entire perimeter from above. Constellations can see the world through their avatar's eyes and fully control them. Thanks to this, Yongsung learned that something important lay within the nearby ruins. A bag of belongings rested there, clearly proving that humans had been here not long ago. The master's heart skipped a beat. This could be his chance to finally return home. All he had to do was find these people and save them from certain death. Yongsung realized there were far too many monsters around and began searching for a solution. The Goblin King had long waited for a moment to prove himself useful to his boss. Using a powerful magical burst, he decided to wipe out the undead in one move, leaving them no chance at all. To speed things up and avoid dragging the fight out, Yongsung joined the battle as well. Together, they unleashed a strike so powerful that the entire planet trembled, as if it were about to split clean in half. After that, the main hero landed with style and drew in a deep breath of heavy, dusty victory. The thought of going home burned sharper than ever. It was time to begin a completely new chapter of life. Still, after the first blast, some monsters remained alive, and the wounded creatures were finished off without hesitation. The moment Young-sung realized people from Earth had been here, nothing could stop him anymore. He tore through endless hordes of monsters, obsessively searching for any sign of survivors. Gon tried to negotiate with the local goblins, but they didn't understand him at all and only retreated in fear. To avoid scaring potential allies, Young-sung asked his friend to take on a human form. It turned out Gon could do exactly that and look completely different from before. The handsome and charismatic Goblin King now resembled a Disney-style prince stepped straight out of a fairy tale. Without bragging, he casually admitted that among goblins he had always been considered exceptionally good-looking. Young-sung was advised to do the same and return to his old appearance before heading home. He changed almost instantly and immediately focused on the main cave of this world. That was where the densest mass of monsters had gathered, desperately calling out to their true master. This boss was known as Tarun, the King of Ghouls, a creature stitched together from thousands of corpses, massive enough to terrify even veteran, fearless hunters. To open a portal to Earth, this monster had to be destroyed at any cost. Meanwhile, in a nearby cave, the humans were slowly saying goodbye to life. Supplies were running dry, and no one dared to step outside anymore. No one moved. The hunters silently lowered their eyes and checked their gear, which was clearly not enough. All that remained was to wait for help, though deep down everyone knew no one was coming. If the porter had been even a little faster, the team would still have far more food. The last battle had been so intense that a single wrong step could have cost the entire group their lives. They managed to find shelter just in time and completely cut themselves off from the outside world. The place resembled ancient Egyptian pyramids where pharaohs were once laid to rest. Monster attacks could be survived here, but without food, survival itself was still in doubt. The Guns team spent a full month trapped in these nightmarish conditions. They grew used to the darkness, and hope slowly began to fade from their hearts. Sooner or later, internal conflict was bound to erupt. Opinions split, and heated arguments broke out among the team members. One half insisted on waiting for reinforcements and believing in outside help. The other half believed they had to go out and try to clear the dungeon themselves. The captain's authority had nearly vanished, and formal ranks no longer mattered. In these conditions, everyone was equal, and no one wanted to obey. Richard snapped and decided to prove that it was far too early to write him off. He activated his magical aura, ready to crush anyone who dared challenge him. One of his closest teammates reminded him that constant fighting would only drain their strength faster. There was no point blaming each other. All of them were responsible for ending up here. No one had known the dungeon's true danger, or they never would have entered. All that remained was either to hope for a miracle or to face death with dignity. Just as the tension eased slightly, a massive impact shattered the stone walls. A flash of light flooded the cave, and with a single touch, the being destroyed their prison. It was an ordinary-looking man who calmly assured them there was nothing left to fear. Another guy appeared behind him, and together they looked like straight-up DC movie superheroes. Even Richard, who was used to seeing himself as the team's main star, stared at them like gods. The other hunters couldn't hold back their emotions, jumping with joy and tears in their eyes. One of the most experienced hunters sharply ordered everyone to get a grip and prepare for the next fight. He knew the outside was still crawling with undead, and that the worst wasn't over yet. The old man had to be calmed down and told that the situation was now completely under control. Young-sung honestly explained that he had arrived through the abyss and, together with his friend, had fully cleared the perimeter. For people from planet Earth, anyone who had passed through the abyss always looked like a madman who had completely lost their mind. After the gates were discovered, incidents like this became more frequent and stopped shocking anyone. Many people fell into the abyss through dungeon portals, and the overwhelming majority of them never came back, and the few who did return almost never kept their sanity intact. That was why the Gun Squad stared at their savior with open suspicion, like he was an unlicensed psycho with no brakes. The hunters were in no rush to lower their weapons, carefully studying the training master's eyes. Only after stepping outside and seeing that every monster had been wiped out did they finally begin to relax. By then, Young-sung already knew he had to act strictly according to plan. He needed to return to Earth without drawing attention, play the role of an ordinary hunter, and slowly expand his circle of followers. That was why he stated that most of the work had been done by his assistant Gon. According to him, it was that insanely talented guy who had taken down the dungeon's main boss. The Goblin King was famous for his magical abilities, so the hunters assumed the assistant was just another mage. However, Young-song didn't lie and honestly admitted that he used martial arts. After that, the entire squad stared at him like he was Biden, forgetting his own speech again. It was the first time in their lives they had ever seen someone use martial arts inside a dungeon. While Young-song was refining his skills in the Abyss, more than 30 years had already passed on Earth. Before this, only one person had managed to spend 28 years in the Abyss, and now that man was locked in a psychiatric clinic. It suddenly became clear why they were looking at him that way. Young-song was an absolute record holder. He had a lot to explain, and needed to prove that his mind was still intact. To convince the hunters, he decided to use a nearby boulder. Tossing the massive rock into the air, the training master instantly demonstrated insane flexibility and body control. Techniques like that were hard to find even in the most expensive blockbuster movies. One precise strike was enough to slice the stone into perfectly even slabs. After that, Young-song pulled fresh monster meat from storage and showed what he had been eating for all those 30 years. The hunters looked confused, but at the same time intensely curious. They wanted to know if such meat really could flood the body with heavenly energy. Young-song prepared a portion for everyone and suggested they take the risk. The aroma was so powerful that their hands reached for the juicy meat almost on their own. One bite was enough for their eyes to widen and their breathing to become calm and steady. In reality, Young-song had used low-grade meat he was planning to throw away anyway. Even that was enough to make them forget the finest dishes Earth had ever offered. They thanked their savior non-stop, swearing they had never tasted anything better. It felt as if their muscles had returned to peak condition, ready to fight without needing rest. When the excitement faded a little, everyone had to step outside and simply take a walk. After a month in captivity, the bright light felt almost painfully unfamiliar. The traders tried to reconnect with the captain, claiming the past no longer mattered. Richard made it clear he remembered everything and would never again work with people who tried to stab him in the back. After that, he sped up and walked away, leaving most of the team behind. Those who remained felt abandoned, but a new opportunity immediately appeared before them. They looked at the Disney-style prince and were ready to trust him more than followers trust any info guru scammer. His magic and sheer power level made it obvious that he was a top-tier hunter. The traders asked to join his team and swore loyalty to the very end. Gon didn't know how to react, since he himself already served another constellation. The people hoped he would lead them to rewards and help clear the most dangerous dungeons. Young-song watched the scene with distrust, worried it could interfere with his plans. He didn't understand why these people wouldn't approach him directly and instead looked at him from a distance. The reason was simple. On Earth, martial artists had long since lost all respect. It hadn't always been like this. Once, a great master named Li Xiaowen was constantly on TV and held up as a role model for the youth. Because of his absence, the training master had missed all the most interesting changes. Young-song had fallen into the abyss in 2009, right when the rise of martial arts academies was beginning in China. Everyone was convinced the age of martial arts was slowly being reborn, especially since students were taught by a living legend known as Master Li. Everything went perfectly until shocking news broke about rank manipulation. Put simply, Master Li had artificially boosted his rank, basically like a blogger flexing a bot verification badge. In reality, he had always been a mid-tier fighter, and once the truth surfaced, inspections began worldwide. It soon turned out that a massive number of martial arts masters had been pulling the same trick for years. For Young-song, this hit hard because he had looked up to his idol for so long, only to realize it was all fake. After that, training halls emptied, tournaments shut down, and the word master increasingly sounded like a joke. Reality was brutal, but it had to be accepted and endured. Maybe one day his own example would change people's views, but that road was still painfully long. To distract himself from heavy thoughts, Young-song decided to talk about constellations instead. The goddess of scales had foretold a massive battle for Earth, and according to her, it should have already begun. It was in the same year the rank manipulation scandal erupted that the day came which changed everything. At first, everything seemed normal, but then a colossal portal opened right in the heart of Seoul. Panic spread as people struggled to understand how to react. Hunters were immediately dispatched, but the situation turned out far more serious than expected. This was no ordinary dungeon with mid-level monsters, but a portal releasing intelligent beings. A well-organized army began systematically wiping out humanity. The monsters moved with precision and coordination, like they had rehearsed the invasion for years. It was obvious their goal was to enslave the planet and turn surviving humans into followers. Yongsung demanded details, needing to know how it all ended. Battles raged worldwide, cities burned, and casualty lists updated faster than the news. Humanity endured, but the price was so high that no one dared call it a victory. That battle was etched into history forever. Accepting it wasn't easy, because everything he had been preparing for was already over. Yongsung had been racing home to save Earth, only to learn it had already been defended without him. A brutal question surfaced in his mind: why he had trained for hundreds of thousands of years, breaking his body to the brink. His friends tried to calm him, explaining that things weren't that simple. Most likely, it had only been a probing strike, a test of the planet's strength. If the constellations truly wanted Earth, they wouldn't have stopped halfway. With all due respect to humanity, to real titans, ordinary hunters were nothing more than ants. Something resembling a fragile truce formed between humans and monsters. People believed they had stopped the invasion by their own strength and earned their enemies' respect. Perhaps benevolent constellations had stepped in to protect Earth. But it was far more likely that a true war between good and evil constellations was approaching. For now, they were simply stockpiling power before the final battle for the planet. A temporary compromise had been reached, but such a truce could never last forever. Yongsung clenched his fist, realizing that stopping now would make all those years meaningless. Massive changes lay ahead, and he needed to build an army of followers as fast as possible. Earth would only be truly safe once he had his own army of avatars. Sooner or later, the truce would collapse and war between constellations would ignite. Planet Earth would become the battlefield, and that's when things would get truly wild. Yongsung drifted into thought only to be snapped back by a powerful magical explosion. Reality demanded his attention, forcing him to live in the here and now. Meanwhile, Gon was steadily winning over other hunters with his abilities. He needed to be careful, since that kind of attention could easily turn dangerous. For now, Earth was relatively calm, largely thanks to new rules imposed on hunters. Governments across the world banned contracts with evil constellations. The goal was to ensure that in a critical moment, hunters would stay on humanity's side. The First War had dealt devastating damage, and many hunters were now relocating to other countries. America aggressively funded elite fighters, unlike Korea, where heroes were mostly loved on posters. If Yongsung truly wanted to keep evolving and growing stronger, sooner or later, he would have to consider changing both his citizenship and his environment. For now, though, he had absorbed far too much new information and wasn't ready to make any decisions. Instead, he activated a new skill known as the Eye of Sauron. This technique allowed him to look at other hunters and read their key attributes without any devices. The skill was available to all constellations and was commonly used to scout potential avatars. Studying Richard Parker, Yongsung noted impressive strength and excellent agility, while intelligence still hovered around the mid-range. He realized that further developing the skill would let him see far more hidden parameters and weak points. At that moment, the system announced the complete extermination of the remaining monsters and the closure of the dungeon. An exit portal would soon open, and the hunters would finally return home. Yongsung had dreamed of this moment for thousands of years, yet now that it was real, a strange unease settled in his chest. By then, journalists and representatives of the Hunter Association had already gathered in the desert near the dungeon. Most of them had long stopped believing the squad would make it out alive. Then the dungeon erupted with multicolored rays, as if exploding from the inside. People scattered in panic, convinced another apocalypse was beginning. Only the most experienced observers understood that this was actually good news. The dungeon had been fully cleared and no longer posed a threat to humanity. When the light faded, a group of hunters appeared where the portal had been, accompanied by two unfamiliar figures. By the next day, global headlines were filled with stories about the clearance of a dangerous dungeon. However, the association assigned it a low rank, and no one received a meaningful reward. Richard spent long, exhausting days trying to fight for justice, but he was simply ignored. He had no proof, and the team members were labeled as surviving lunatics trying to squeeze out a bonus. In the end, they had to accept reality and thank fate for at least letting them survive. Meanwhile, the Master of Training and his companion calmly adapted to human life. They were ready to pass any inspections needed to prove they were mentally stable. Psychological tests revealed no serious abnormalities. Still, doctors kept a close watch on Yongsung, fully aware that he had spent 3 decades in the abyss. Korean authorities showed little interest in keeping him in the country. Apparently, there were no longer enough resources or motivation to invest in hunters, making relocation the obvious choice. American agents moved much faster and immediately began offering better conditions. Their attention first focused on the mage, whom they considered the strongest member of the team. Gon remained loyal to his master and calmly made it clear he would follow him anywhere. Agents from different countries were stunned, seeing for the first time such a powerful mage serving a martial artist. They had to urgently change tactics and shift their focus to Yongsong himself. From that moment on, he was courted from all sides, persuaded to accept new citizenship. Yongsong seriously considered a green card because even immortals respected a country with clear contracts. In truth, that was all he cared about. Everything else was irrelevant. Using magic, Gon managed to eavesdrop on the agent's conversation and relay it to his master. They openly doubted whether offering a long-term contract to a martial artist was worth the risk. Their real interest lay in the mage, while the rest were seen as secondary. Despite their doubts, they had to play by the rules, and within hours, Yongsong received an official offer from the US government. What followed was a long road of bureaucracy and attribute verification. The process was draining, endless tests, forms, and repetitive questions. Officials were especially interested in how familiar Yongsong was with the laws of the Abyss. He had to lie constantly, insisting he had never signed a contract with a constellation or fought avatars. The final stage was a strength assessment through contact with a magical core. His rank update after 30 years of absence went nothing like the examiners expected. A single touch was enough for the magical sphere to shatter into fragments. Something like this had never happened before, especially not with someone recently considered weak. Everyone knew the mana-measuring crystal sphere contained far more energy than an ordinary hunter possessed. Normally, as mana filled it, the color would simply change according to rank. But this time, the system had clearly glitched. Normally, after such a test, hunters feel extreme exhaustion, since they effectively hand over their entire energy reserve to the system. With Yongsong, everything played out differently. The magic sphere was destroyed, yet he felt completely fine. The destruction of the sphere was deliberate, a clean move meant to hide his true level of power. All the commission could do now was guess how dangerous he really was and assign the closest possible estimate. When the testing ended, Yongsong was politely asked to wait in the corridor. The moment he stepped out of the office, the doctor made an urgent call. He contacted representatives of the Ambitus clan and reported the strange incident, keeping the details vague. A few minutes later, every hunter received an updated card. Gon was classified as a mid-rank hunter, while his companion drew the short straw. Yongsong's card once again displayed the lowest rank, and he let out a quiet breath, looking away. Still, the main objective was achieved. No one understood who they were really dealing with. Once all formalities were settled, Richard decided to personally visit his saviors. Without their help, he would have remained trapped in the illusion of chaos forever. And he knew it. That was why he offered to take them to America and host them at his place for a while. Refusing such an offer would have been stupid, and minutes later, they were already in the car. After endless years in the Abyss, the comfort of the human world felt almost unreal. On the way, Yongsong recalled that exactly 1 year ago, on that very day, he had defeated the Great Wolf. He never forgot that moment, because it was the first time he truly felt like a living legend. It all began with goblins dropping to their knees and worshipping his strength. They even built a slime bath so he could wash off after the battle. Some goblins were ready to offer their own children as sacrifices to the new king. They thought it would please him, while Yongsong at the time wanted to sink into the ground from sheer embarrassment. Now, it was clear why Richard was so desperate to repay the one who had saved his life. In a way, he resembled the goblins, just in an expensive suit and with a god complex. Growing slightly bored, they shifted the conversation to America and the current state of life there. Richard openly admitted that he was the son of a powerful businessman and had never denied himself anything. They talked like old acquaintances, and time slipped by unnoticed. None of them realized that at that very moment, a mysterious man was closely watching the car. Seconds later, the limousine was abruptly cut off by a bright red Lamborghini. The hunters inside instantly went on alert, ready for a fight. They had no idea what to expect until the driver reported that there was only one person ahead. Yongsong tensed and decided to look the man in the eyes himself. The stranger's figure was hidden by sunlight, standing with his back to the setting sun. Taking a few steps forward, he revealed an eccentric outfit and a confident, predatory stride. His gaze was locked onto Yongsong as if searching for traces of the past. Richard Parker and his security immediately recognized Juan, known in business circles as the Dragon. He was another successful tycoon, and his appearance in the scorching desert felt out of place. Richard was certain that Juan had come for him. That illusion shattered quickly when it became clear the dragon's interest lay elsewhere. He walked past Richard Parker and stopped directly in front of the invincible master of training. A brief pause followed, and Young-sung finally recognized a face from his past. Standing before him was his former guild boss, the man who once supported him and gave his first guidance. Over the years, he had changed beyond recognition, becoming a true alpha of this world. They had not seen each other in a very long time, and in that span, Juan had built a massive corporation. He had also divorced more than 20 times, earning a reputation as an incurable heartbreaker. Even the bodyguards hesitated to interfere. No one wanted trouble with a top-tier hunter. For Young-sung, the situation felt overwhelmingly complex, and he honestly couldn't grasp how it had come to this. The last time they met, Juan led a weak clan that handled low-level dungeon clears. Back then, he was insecure and constantly preached caution when facing monsters. Everything changed 2 years later, when the invasion of evil constellations erupted across the entire world. Back then, Seoul turned into a full-scale bloodbath, and every hunter had to go all in. There was no other option. Cautious tactics meant guaranteed death the very next day. Juan never wanted to become that kind of man, but circumstances forced him to change forever. Thanks to hunters like him, South Korea managed to purge the sticky corruption of the otherworld. The monsters were wiped out completely, and Dragon Juan awakened his true abilities. From that day on, he and his allies became living heroes. The government handed them gold medals, and that was where the celebration ended. The heroes received nothing but loud titles and were forced to heal their wounds with their own money. They never got a proper pension, social support, or the real privileges they had earned. Many Koreans were left disappointed with the authorities and had no idea what to do next. They had risked their lives for the country, only to be left with nothing. Juan now laughs at those events because they shattered his old life and opened the door to a new one. He moved to America and realized that some countries still respect heroes and powerful hunters. He built a massive corporation, earned millions of dollars, and carved his name into history. He was 63 years old now, still in peak shape and nowhere near slowing down. Young-sung, on the other hand, had barely changed and remained the same calm, quiet guy. When his friends found his farewell letter, they couldn't believe he had truly gone into the abyss. Everyone was convinced he had lost his mind and would never be heard from again. From that moment on, the master of training was considered dead, right up until the rescue of the guns team. And now, Richard Parker had to accept that it was time to part ways with his savior. Juan was taking his old friend with him to Los Angeles, promising parties, nightlife, and a no-limits lifestyle. Honestly, Young-sung didn't care. He just wanted to adapt to the new world as fast as possible. After 30 years of absence, it felt surreal to see how much reality had changed. The City of Angels looked different, flooded with hunters chasing fame from every direction. Government programs sponsored the best of them, so hunters were tearing each other apart for contracts like influencers fighting over brand deals. From that moment on, the city was considered a paradise for heroes, even though most never landed the dream contract. When Young-sung saw the dragon industry headquarters, he couldn't take his eyes off that architectural monster. It felt like a structure that shouldn't exist at all, and the massive line at the entrance was even more shocking. Juan explained that hunters lined up there every single day hoping to enter his guild. They were ready to accept any condition just to show off their stats. The dragon was clearly hiding something, or simply didn't want to talk too much in Richard Parker's presence. He had changed drastically, becoming the complete opposite of who he once was. Juan picked up new lovers daily and once, out of pure boredom, bought an entire family of pandas from a Chinese zoo. With a snap of his fingers, his staff appeared out of nowhere. They called Juan their voice and behaved as if a true king stood before them. The boss ordered the best tutors to be brought in immediately so his friend back from hell could learn everything he had missed. It became clear that instead of a training hall, Young-sung was about to face a phase of intense education. Meanwhile, Richard Parker had to head back home. He felt slighted even though he pretended not to care. Deep down, Richard wished he had been invited to Dragon Industry and given a shot at true independence. Young-sung watched as his old friend treated subordinates harshly. Juan could fire someone over a bad shirt or the wrong look. He never allowed that kind of behavior before, but now everyone seemed used to it. Money really does change people, and rarely for the better. Juan even had to justify himself, reminding everyone how much he paid his employees. He offered massive salaries and demanded absolute professionalism in return. After that, Young-sung went to lectures to catch up on everything he had missed over the years. Even though endless training was familiar to him, knowledge about his home planet felt especially important. He carefully wrote down every word until the material was fully absorbed. Now, Yongsong knew that evil constellations had taken over China, North Korea, Europe, and South America. Cities burned and nations clashed, but at some point the war forced them onto the same side of the barricades. After Korea was liberated, many heroes left the country in search of a better life and real opportunities. Dragon Juan was the clearest example. He started from nothing and now stood among America's top hunters. He walked into boardrooms without security, signed contracts without reading them, and decided people's fates with a single nod. It had to be said, Yongsong was incredibly lucky to secure his old friend's support at this exact moment. Without that backing, he could have easily been used by people who should never be trusted. Fully trusting Juan, the master of training directly offered him to become his avatar. Juan was clearly not ready for that turn of events, and for a second thought, his friend came back from the abyss, hooked on something heavy. After that, Yongsong chose a patient approach and decided to prove his strength through actions, not words. A few days later, they went together to a training arena in the very heart of Los Angeles. From the outside, the building looked like a massive glass greenhouse, but that impression was a lie. Stepping inside, Yongsong scanned the arena and thought it felt too calm, almost boring. Everything changed when Juan snapped his fingers and blinding beams of light flooded the entire space. He explained that hunters now trained using cutting-edge next-generation technology. In essence, it was an advanced virtual reality capable of recreating any combat scenario. Set the right parameters and a hunter could polish any skill to absolute perfection. It turned out these arenas had long been used not only for training, but also for official competitions. Hunters, tired of real monsters, increasingly preferred fighting each other. They formed teams, leagues, and organized full-scale tournaments. People were willing to pay insane money just to watch hunters brutalize one another, content for the same crowd that binges trash streams. On top of PvP, the Six-Star League offered battles against top-tier virtual monsters. This industry generated massive profits and kept drawing more attention to the hunter profession. The US government actively sponsored the league, betting on the younger generation. They understood perfectly that sooner or later, another monster war would erupt and an army would be needed. Juan tried to spark his friend's interest and suggested he compete in these events. If Yongsong truly wanted to announce himself and show the world his skills, there was no better stage. The entire country would watch his fights and victory would earn him thousands of fans. For someone aiming to expand an army of followers, this was almost the perfect setup. No one could predict when the evil constellations would start the war, so preparation had to begin now. On top of that, Juan made it clear that these performances paid absurdly well. People around the world quit their jobs just for a shot at landing a massive paycheck. For someone who dreamed of becoming a martial arts master, this reality sounded bitter. Hunters used to fight for ideals. Now they fought for contracts and sponsors, basically the NBA with monsters. That meant accepting the rules of the game and showing what he had learned in the abyss. The Master of Training immediately asked to raise the simulation difficulty to maximum and let him warm up. Juan looked at him like he was insane and even tried to talk him out of it. He warned that a low-rank hunter wouldn't survive the pressure of these systems. Yongsong had to explain that he was no longer just some gym guy. He had survived every stage of the abyss and forged himself into a constellation with his own hands. At first, the dragon didn't believe a single word and seriously considered calling an ambulance. But then, he decided to verify everything personally and agreed to fight. If Yongsong was really that good, now was his chance to prove it. Juan had held the highest rank for over 35 years and hadn't lost a single battle. They clashed as if they had nothing to lose and had never been friends at all. That was when Yongsong first encountered artifacts embedded as tattoos. Apparently, this tech had long become mainstream among top-tier hunters. Activate the tattoo, and magical missiles instantly entered the fight. For Yongsong, it was an interesting experience, but he had no intention of slowing down. His gaze stayed cold and focused, as if he were still deep in the abyss. He chose not to spread his energy and began compressing all his power into a single point. Mere moments later, a magical beam tore through the air toward the dragon, aiming to punch straight through his legendary defense. It was worth remembering that Juan had become the very first UHC champion several years ago. Even back then, he understood one thing clearly. To force an opponent into full defense, you never give them a single second to breathe. Following the activation of the magic tattoos, Six Circle magic was unleashed into the fight. The technique was known as the lava circle, a skill that once erased anyone reckless enough to challenge the dragon. Yongsong was ready for it, having already deployed a defensive screen powered by pure Kai energy. He absorbed the first strike as if it were completely meaningless. One of his eyes flared with blue light, as if a Terminator had awakened inside him. No matter how badly he wanted to win, Yongsong never forgot about strategy and self-control. Maximum power had to be restrained, or nothing in this place would remain standing. Killing an old friend in the very first training match would be beyond stupid. So he chose a precise approach, a clean, fast victory without unnecessary consequences. The dragon's protective barrier shattered the instant the key sphere made contact. Hwan felt crushing pressure twist his insides and realized he had never faced anything like this before. Even battles against Constellation avatars had been far easier than this. Despite his age and experience, he could not believe how far ahead Yongsong had gone. He had to admit his mistake and mentally take back every doubt. Even if Hwan never said it out loud, inside he felt like he had been beaten down like a helpless kitten. It was hard to accept that a man who vanished into the abyss had reached the peak of martial arts. Now, Hwan had no doubts. A true constellation stood before him. It was time to understand what Yongsong actually wanted and how they would move forward. The Master of Training made it clear right away that he hadn't returned to Earth for fame, but for support. He warned that the truce between constellations was a temporary illusion and wouldn't last long. New Abyss Titans could appear at any moment to seize a world with billions of followers. The ceasefire was nothing but smoke and mirrors, a way to lull humanity into complacency. Yongsong stated that he had no intention of drawing attention to himself and wanted to remain just a hunter. At the same time, he needed to steadily grow his number of followers, or Earth would be doomed. Hwan was ready to join his team immediately, but Yongsong hadn't even asked. He didn't want to put his friend at risk and preferred to search for other avatars instead. Hwan disagreed with that decision and offered an alternative. He was willing to invest money, influence, and connections to help Yongsong reach his goal. To solidify their trust, they had to formalize a contract with the constellation. Hwan wasn't required to fight personally, but from that day on, he had to do everything possible to strengthen the Master of Training. After the battle, they took a short break and headed to the nearest coffee shop. It was a place where they could speak freely without worrying about prying ears. There, they began drafting a step-by-step strategy for what came next. The main objective was simple. No one should even suspect that Yongsong was a constellation. He could slowly gather avatars, but that required the very best hunters. Hwan explained that the modern world revolved around teams, and solo players had long lost respect. To earn trust, defeating a single champion was nowhere near enough. He needed to make a loud statement at the tournament mentioned earlier. The Lava and Magma Kitten immediately pointed out that similar competitions existed in the Abyss. Constellations boosted their power by sending avatars to fight on foreign territories. In essence, it was the exact same system used on Earth. That was how constellations selected the strongest and most promising candidates. Yongsong could copy that model and turn it against them. No one would serve an unknown hunter at the start. He had to pull the same move as on the Goblin planet and earn loyalty through raw power. Hwan suggested starting with the tournament and turning Yongsong into a local superstar. That would raise his rank, unlock high-level dungeons, and attract the strongest hunters around. Everything sounded insanely hype, but now there was only one thing left: to start and waste not a single minute. If everything went according to plan, Yongsong would close the gap with his old friend surprisingly fast. Victories didn't just bring respect, they came with real power and serious money attached. And if the goal was to grow a following, all of that would come in very handy. Dragon Industry was home to names hunters mentioned in lowered voices, more like a warning than praise. Hwan could introduce Yongsong to these people, giving him a chance to train and scout potential avatars. On top of that, the UHC qualification tournament was about to begin, and the Master of Training had to make a statement there. After the conversation, Yongsong went to take a well-earned rest, saving his strength for the battles ahead. At the same time, Hwan rushed to his office and ordered his eldest daughter to be summoned immediately. She had long been working as a hunter manager, and her experience could drastically speed things up. If his eldest daughter became Yongsong's manager, building a successful career would take no time at all. The problem was that Ain Lawrence had an extremely harsh personality. She had clashed even with the most dangerous hunters before, earning herself the nickname of a witch. Rumor had it her temperament was even worse than her father's, and joking around with her was a terrible idea. On top of being a world-famous manager, Ain Lawrence was also a mid-rank hunter herself. Young Song had no idea what awaited him as he headed toward the massive arena for the qualification matches. He looked slightly lost, unsure of what exactly to expect from the tournament. Too many different kinds of hunters had gathered in one place. Some arrived in brand new convertibles flashing elite gear, while others looked like they had just crawled out of a sewer, dreaming of becoming superstars. Winning this tournament could turn nobodies into heroes, and that was exactly what Young Song needed right now. Unfortunately, he didn't get much support from his assistant, who had gone way too deep into video games. The moment the guy bought a smartphone, he seemed to forget real life entirely, a textbook victim of endless scrolling and short-form brain rot. At the very end, Gon still wished his boss luck, promising to root harder than he ever did for his own Subway Surf high score. While Young Song prepared for his match, the tournament lounge was buzzing non-stop. Journalists, TV crews, and recruiters from various clans had all gathered there. One of them was named Sid, present under direct orders from his boss. His job was to watch the fights and recruit the most talented hunters into his clan. But today, he had a special mission because a highly curious individual had appeared in the qualifiers. The system had flagged that a hunter named Young Song had broken a magical power measuring device. That meant the guy might possess abilities impossible to evaluate with standard methods. During the tournament, he was expected to reveal what he was truly capable of. Sid had to keep a close eye on Young Song and make an offer at exactly the right moment. His boss had made it painfully clear. Mistakes were not an option this time. If another guild snatched Young Song first, Sid would be out of a job. That was bad news, since his mortgage had him in a chokehold stronger than any deal with the devil. He couldn't afford to fail and was ready to work at absolute maximum output. The tournament finally kicked off, and the Master of Training prepared for his first battle. Even while hiding his true power, Young Song was ready to do whatever it took to win. His first opponent was already waiting on the virtual arena. A bald man in a bizarre outfit looked like he had wandered in from a low-budget Black Panther sequel. Since this was only the qualification round, there were barely any spectators. Still, every breath was audible, and the tension among the hunters was impossible to miss. Young Song remained perfectly calm, something the journalists noticed immediately. The fight was broadcast nationwide, even if it mostly interested a narrow circle of professionals, especially those working in guilds and hunting for fresh talent. Many were surprised to hear that a low-rank hunter had dared to step into the arena. Fighters like that usually avoided risks, since one loss could cost them both their career and their health. On top of that, no one had seen a martial arts master compete in the UHC League for a long time. That was exactly why everyone wanted to see how his encounter with the so-called Black Panther would end. The massive bald brute charged forward in full beast mode, acting like a Marvel reject trying way too hard to stay relevant. Thanks to that relentless push, the opponent had clawed his way to mid-rank and genuinely dreamed of reaching the very top. The problem was simple and brutal. He had stepped into the ring against a man who had spent hundreds of thousands of years in the abyss. Young Song had fought and defeated constellations, so facing an ordinary human was doomed to be predictable from the start. A single strike was enough to shatter facial bones and send the bald boar straight into a lights-out knockout. It was so savage that the few spectators nearly swallowed their tongues in shock. The referee froze like a statue and forgot to announce the winner for several long seconds. Just like that, Young Song set a new record for the qualifiers, ending the fight 3.5 seconds after it began. The word success didn't even come close, because what had just happened broke every familiar frame. As the opponent was rushed to the trauma unit, the audience struggled to process what they had just witnessed. Sid watched the birth of a new legend with his own eyes. He immediately dialed his boss to report what had happened. Right after that, he ordered the recruitment process to begin at once. If he wanted to keep his job, he would have to offer top-tier conditions and build a connection with the Master of Training. Meanwhile, Young Song calmly observed the next match, assessing the level of his future opponents. He looked at the arena like it was nothing more than a warm-up, with not a trace of excitement left in his eyes. At some point, he heard a door open behind him, and a man with a camera stepped into the room. Sid introduced himself and started talking about a team supposedly capable of turning martial arts into a full-blown cult. The pitch sounded polished, but it meant nothing to someone who already had his own path mapped out. Young Song made it clear right away that he had no intention of joining someone else's team and preferred to move on his own. Not wanting to lose his job, Sid kept trying to talk him out of it for a long while. He spoke about benefits and future prospects, but none of it mattered. At one point, he even offered a solid percentage from the profits of magical materials obtained in dungeons. Those kinds of deals were usually reserved for superstars, yet even that failed. The master of training merely smiled calmly, showing he wasn't interested. At that moment, his name echoed through the arena, and Yongsong began preparing for his next match. If after the first fight he had been called a future star, now everyone wondered what they'd say after a second win. This time, noticeably more people had gathered around the arena. Rumors spread fast. Yongsong stepped into the center of the octagon without any rush, eyes locked forward, as if he already knew the ending. He instantly analyzed Gregory Martinez and realized he was facing a level 81 hunter. To be fair, the guy was considered one of the best in his country and had come to America chasing fame. He had earned his reputation as an archer after once killing a giant monster with a pinpoint shot straight through the heart. Yongsong had no intention of playing on someone else's field and immediately forced the fight into close range. Gregory Martinez accepted the challenge and activated his magical lock skill. This technique boosted his damage and blocked most incoming attacks. The spectators gulped for air, barely holding together under the tension of the clash. No one had ever seen fighters of this level collide in a qualification tournament before. The magical lock had never failed, until today. One strike was enough to shatter the defensive barrier and claim yet another victory. Now, recruiters from different clans were ready to tear each other apart for this hunter. Sid nervously pulled at his hair, realizing he was one step away from unemployment. All around, people were already discussing the new hero and wondering whether he could defeat the next opponent. Very soon, he would face Eugene Eli, the man who had been considered the tournament's main favorite. Before that, Yongsong had stepped into the arena for weeks without breaks, sending mid-rank hunters out on stretchers one after another. Not long ago, he knocked out a guy with a mohawk nicknamed Galubi without even breaking his breathing rhythm. Right after that, the resistance of Ralph from the Franklin clan was so weak the fight ended almost instantly. And after all that, he wiped out Eugene Eli without a flicker of emotion, even though that same morning, Eugene had been called the tournament's top favorite. The audience got a new hero, but instead of hype, a strange confusion lingered in the air. To them, Yongsong looked like a dangerous psycho who should probably be locked away before setting another record for broken bodies in a single night. Now that Yongsong had reached the finals, he was set to face Lawrence from the Rainbow Clan. The blonde was confident in his victory, convinced his opponent's movements were too straightforward and easy to read. But once the fight started, he failed to block a single strike and quickly realized the night was about to be long and painful. The final bout ended before Yongsong even took a full breath. The referee raised his hand and there was no opponent left standing. Silence hung over the stands as spectators exchanged looks as if they had just seen a trick with no possible explanation. None of them knew that Yongsong had spent tens of thousands of years in the abyss, honing his skills to an absolute limit. Even hunters, considered specialists in solo combat, were nothing more than warm-up targets to him. It felt good to briefly taste fame and feel the attention of the strongest clans across America. At the same time, Yongsong drew even more attention from the constellations, who began to see him as a rare treasure. They didn't yet realize he was deliberately hiding his true power, merely preparing to unleash his real peak. Right after the finals, the strongest constellations observing the planet decided to make him offers. The most aggressive interest came from a warrior wrapped in madness and blood. This powerful constellation was used to claiming the best avatars, but this time, things went off script. Yongsong calmly refused, while the lava and magma kitten stepped in, declaring him its personal avatar. The clash between constellations stayed limited to messages and loud words, with no real action taken. Even so, small sparks like that could eventually grow into a full-scale war. Yongsong ignored the pressure and spoke as if he truly had nothing to lose. He made it clear he wouldn't sign a contract with anyone, pushing the warrior into open rage. When the talks bored him, he simply ordered the constellations to get lost. They promised revenge, without fully understanding who they were dealing with. Yongsong saw no reason for politeness or careful wording. As a token of gratitude, the lava and magma kitten rewarded him with soul shards. Among constellations, such stones functioned as currency, meaning Yongsong would now have no trouble settling interdimensional dealings. By evening, the main office of Dragon Industry was still buzzing with activity. The boss had just been informed that nearly every major American clan was hunting for his friend. He was nervous, fully aware that Yongsong was a true diamond he couldn't afford to lose. Special attention was focused on the Embiidus clan, the main rival in the fight for young hunters. Juan had long dreamed of wiping those slippery worms off the market since they hurt business worse than taxes and unions combined. Soon after, news arrived of the official conclusion of the UHC qualifying tournament. The dragon knew his friend was talented, but he hadn't expected him to steamroll everyone so effortlessly. The victory was absolute, and just a few hours later, an additional rank evaluation test was scheduled. Even then, Yongsong showed nothing extraordinary and received only a promotion to mid-rank. Hwan fought to the end for his friend, insisting they were looking at the strongest hunter on Earth. The commission representative remained unmoved and refused to change the decision. Maybe that was for the best. Extra attention wasn't needed right now. The master of training preferred to climb slowly, making his growth look natural. It was time to organize training with real professionals. Hwan arranged to send his friend to a team known as Icarus. It was a group of exceptional talents who constantly pushed each other to grow stronger. To match their level, high-class weapons were required. Hwan presented a gift, pulling from storage a sacred lunar sword of incredible durability. He had obtained this top-tier artifact in China after completing a government mission. In the past, such things were pure fantasy, but now they had become reality. Back then, China had been on the brink of destruction due to the invasion of evil constellations in the north. Several critically dangerous dungeons spiraled out of control, while 3 top-tier monsters spread chaos. Hwan accepted the challenge alone and fought them for days that felt like an eternity. At times, he felt death closing in and nearly lost faith, yet somehow survived that hell. In the end, he casually mentioned introducing Yongsong to a new manager and left without waiting for an answer. Just a few hours after that conversation, preparations for the meeting were already underway. Yongsong put on an apron and, together with his companion, returned to his favorite hobby. He cooked with the same focus and passion he brought to training, even though no one paid him for it. The dish turned out juicy and perfectly balanced, as if crafted by a chef from an elite restaurant. Ain Lawrence prepared herself to taste a dish made by a man who had wandered the abyss for years, surviving where others completely lost their minds. She was visibly nervous, having never tried food cooked from ingredients like these before. Everything changed the moment she took the first bite. A chill ran down her spine, and her breathing stumbled for a split second. Ain had always considered herself a hardcore Texas BBQ fan, especially brisket from the state's top-tier spots. But this spicy cut existed on a completely different level, making her instantly forget every flavor and preference she'd ever had. The secret was magic itself, a unique arcane taste that couldn't be compared to anything on Earth. Unlike dishes from any chef, everything Yongsong cooked was literally soaked in abyssal energy. Unable to hold back, she kept repeating that Yongsong absolutely had to become a chef and open his own restaurant. It had to be calmly explained that his true love was training, and cooking was just a hobby, a way to restore both body and mind. Just minutes later, Ain Lawrence finished every last crumb and sincerely thanked the cook for the rare, intense emotions. After that, she slipped back into her cold, professional persona, ready to talk business. Ain was a top-tier manager, someone who could push hunters to an entirely different level. She analyzed her clients' abilities, exposed weaknesses, and built strategies for real long-term growth. With her help, hunters secured premium contracts, elite conditions, and fast-track careers in any clan on the planet. In the modern world, hunters barely survived without managers, and Yongsong would have to accept those rules. It was obvious he wasn't thrilled. He preferred the old-school path: training, combat, victory, no brands, no managers, no motivational Instagram quotes. She had to explain that things worked differently now, and in a developed world, raw power needed infrastructure. A hunter had to fight well, handle the press, manage image, and constantly raise status. Especially if he planned to train with the Icarus clan, packed with maniacs and fanatics, proper preparation was mandatory. Ain Lawrence handed him her number and said he could call anytime. After leaving, she couldn't shake the strange feeling twisting uneasily in her chest. A man who spent 30 years in the abyss should have been a broken psycho, yet he was disturbingly normal. One way or another, he would have to learn to fight mages, since UHC monster trials were coming soon. The next day began, as always, with calculated, brutal training. While Yongsong worked on his body and pushed muscle growth, Gon kept breaking records in video games. Right after physical training came the time for spiritual development. Yongsong closed his eyes and sank into meditation, anchoring himself fully in the present moment. This state allowed him to tap into constellation broadcasts and watch the stars at play. Growing only as a hunter on Earth wasn't enough for him. Yongsong wanted to strengthen himself as a constellation too, which meant constant battles in the abyss. A constellation battle meant two higher beings choosing avatars and pitting them against each other for power, influence, or resources. Right now, the master of training was unknown, so almost no one wanted to fight him. He had to admit that he simply wasn't interesting yet and started thinking about boosting his image. At least on Earth, things were moving faster, and the next morning, he headed to the Icarus clan training base. The complex housed private halls and living quarters for elite hunters. Everyone had unique abilities, so training was strictly individual. It felt unreal, especially compared to the past where everyone crammed into one dull, miserable gym. Yongsong left his assistant outside. The gaming addict was useless for now anyway. The Goblin King was completely absorbed in his phone, and until he burned himself out, he was a lost cause. The master of training calmly stepped into the main hall and saw equipment of a level he'd never encountered before. It felt like dissolving into the space, like a small fish in a calm ocean. This was where the first meeting happened, one destined to become fatal. Standing before him was a powerfully built woman who could challenge any man without hesitation. She greeted the newcomer and immediately explained where everything was. Her name was Elizabeth Gutierrez, and at first glance she seemed friendly and open. She suggested a light warm-up, and one handshake was enough to reveal that this newcomer was anything but ordinary. Elizabeth nearly exploded from a simple handshake. Until that moment, she had considered herself among the strongest hunters alive. For the first time, someone was clearly stronger, and she even assumed he was a close combat mage. Yongsung calmly explained that he was a martial arts user, watching her reaction with interest. He asked her not to jump to conclusions and promised his skills would definitely impress her. Elizabeth had been into martial arts for years and could easily show a thing or two herself. Through relentless training, she went through boxing, jiu-jitsu, Muay Thai, and even wrestling, slowly turning her body into a living weapon. She didn't even bother taking a serious stance, throwing a brief glance as if the outcome was already obvious. If he was really that strong, there was no need for talk or theatrics. The truth could be tested right here, right now. Elizabeth led Yongsong to the hunter's training hall, where heavy punching bags hung around the ring instead of machines. A blonde guy covered in tattoos was already there, immediately locking onto the new face. His name was Anthony, and within minutes it was clear he suffered from an advanced case of main character syndrome. He believed himself smarter and stronger than everyone else and was convinced his so-called unique skills would one day conquer the world. Anthony had long crowned himself part of the clan's elite and generously advised Yongsong to listen very carefully to his wisdom. In reality, he was just another narcissist not worth attention or time. Once Anthony finally disappeared into the locker room, Elizabeth suggested a proper warm-up. They stepped onto the wide ring and prepared to collide in an honest spar. She looked relaxed, not even considering that this confidence might come at a brutal price. The moment the spar began, Yongsong instantly closed the distance and punished her hard for losing focus. Letting a martial artist get close was the first rule of Fight Club, you never break. Within seconds, Elizabeth had no doubts. This was real talent. Yongsong struck from impossible angles, displaying terrifying speed and shameless confidence, like the rules simply didn't apply to him. To somehow slow the pressure from this mysterious newcomer, Elizabeth pushed herself to the absolute limit. She swung her blade like she meant to take his head off, forcing Yongsong to stay sharp for a brief moment. Still, he kept advancing, as if fists, steel, and magic were things he had survived long ago. The pressure became so overwhelming that she was forced to switch tactics. She all but forgot the long blade and fully committed to close-range combat magic. It didn't matter. Yongsong's fists tempered in the abyss shattered every barrier in their way. He confidently secured the first round, leaving no doubt about the outcome. Elizabeth refused to accept defeat and immediately demanded a rematch. The result didn't change, and soon the entire hall was watching a straight-up beating. Until that day, her ego had lived in the stratosphere. Friendly on the surface, she had always believed she was stronger than everyone around her. This fight shattered that illusion. For the first time, she faced someone this ruthless and overwhelming. She kept demanding another round until her head began splitting from pain. Yongsong clearly never studied Earth-style manners. He moved cold and methodical, as if she were just another Abyss opponent. Judging by the other hunters' reactions, this kind of spectacle was not normal in this hall. Even though the Icarus clan had no gender limits, watching this was still rough. Elizabeth Gutierrez turned into a battered punching bag in just a few rounds. Her face made it clear no makeup, filters, or sponsorships were fixing this. The strangest part was that Yongsong kept applying psychological pressure, mocking and suggesting yet another round. Years in the abyss had made him too hard, and Earth's rules no longer felt mandatory. After a spar like that, rest was necessary to wash away the tension and pain. Hunters rarely hold grudges. Fights like these are usually seen as mutual growth. Still, it was obvious that this first loss in a long time cut Elizabeth deeply. She swore to take revenge and promised she would never forget this day. From that moment on, she trained twice as hard with a single goal: payback. The next day, Young-sung returned to the Icarus Hall to continue training. Today, the place was packed with real professionals, tension hanging in every movement. It felt like standing among the X-Men, missing only Wolverine. Some hunters he recognized from the UHC arena, but most faces were new. During preparation, Young-sung ran into Richard Parker from the Guns team. Circumstances had forced Richard to join the Icarus clan, making him part of this group as well. Soon after, the clan's mentor appeared, a high-rank hunter named Ernest. He brutally ordered everyone to shut it and made it clear that anyone breaking discipline would end up in a trash bin outside the hall. Spending only a few seconds on a dry welcome for the newcomers, he immediately jumped straight into the core of the training. During his speech, Ernest reminded everyone that a hunter's main weapon was neither artifacts nor magic, but their own hands. Young-sung knew that truth too well, and even spoke it a split second before the instructor, as if finishing the thought for him. That blind yet unshakable belief in himself had made him a champion, back when the whole world doubted the value of martial arts. For him, those were never empty words, even though others often saw such confidence as dangerous arrogance. Ernest warned that hunters had to be ready for anything that might happen in a dungeon or the depths of the abyss. Right after that, he triggered a burst of magical light, and many felt their knees betray them. It was hard to put into words. The pressure made even the most experienced and cold-blooded fighters doubt themselves. Only Young-sung kept smiling, mostly because a Goblin King partner stood nearby, clearly not giving a damn about what was happening. Anthony kept throwing looks at the main character, silently challenging him to an unspoken contest. The guy was insanely self-confident, and today felt like the perfect moment to see what he was actually worth. Ernest announced that the trial would be done in pairs, since a hunter must be able to protect not only themselves, but also an ally. Using advanced tech, a top-tier illusion was activated, nearly indistinguishable from reality. A portal tore open in midair, and warped monster faces instantly crawled out of it. Wyverns were considered among the most dangerous monsters, ones even veteran hunters preferred to avoid. Most looked tense and scared, while Gon kept staring at his phone, completely ignoring the threat. Ernest carefully watched the newcomers, fully aware that these were the people personally recommended by the chairman. The show promised to be entertaining. All it lacked was popcorn and an ice-cold soda. Some hunters scattered in panic, while others felt confident and even excited. Anthony activated speed magic and dashed forward, trying to dodge the first strike. By the rules, Young-sung was paired with that smug narcissist. To avoid extra trouble, he mentally decided it would be better to knock his partner out and act solo. There was simply no other option. Otherwise, Anthony would keep dragging him down and getting in the way. It might have looked like an excuse for the main character's actions, but it was hard not to side with someone who actually knew how to fight. Scooping up the arrogant partner, the master narrowly dodged a devastating attack at the last moment. The instructor had never seen martial arts grant such terrifying speed. For a second, it felt like he was young again, back when people still believed in hand-to-hand masters. Anthony couldn't believe some lowly rookie was ignoring his commands and acting on his own. Ernest decided he had seen enough and snapped his fingers, stopping the trial. He ordered all the losers to leave the arena and continue training on their own. Only the strongest remained, those who would have to endure the next attack. This time, the strike would come from below, and only Young-sung sensed the danger seconds before it began. Anthony, as usual, was lost in dreams of greatness and completely missed the real threat. Young-sung had to drag his partner again, since Anthony's combat intelligence felt like an NPC from a tutorial mission. A massive fanged skull burst from underground and immediately started devouring everything around it. The ancient sandworm that devoured stone was considered long extinct, but technology recreated it with terrifying accuracy. The monster attacked, reacting to the slightest vibration. Ernest clearly enjoyed the scene, reminiscing about the days when he himself fought such creatures. Only one of the trainees made him watch especially closely. It was the master of training, who had just dodged the worm's strike and instantly steadied his breathing as if nothing had happened. During a brief pause, while others desperately gasped for air, a stranger approached Young-sung. It was Smallwood High Mountain, a mid-rank hunter trying to understand how the master sensed the underground monster. Young Song calmly admitted that a single sound had been enough to figure it out. After a short rest, training resumed, and the master of training continued to stand out from the rest. He dodged alongside two partners, then blocked magic one-handed completely on his own. When Anthony fell under illusion control, Young Song had to restrain his wild temper by himself. By the fifth round, the hunters looked like squeezed lemons, barely staying on their feet. That was when Ernest announced the warm-up was over and the real training would begin soon. The next stage would be a dungeon fully simulated using the clan's technology. Smallwood kept cracking jokes non-stop, and Young Song caught himself realizing that for the first time in ages, he didn't want the conversation to end. Smallwood's humor came naturally, cutting tension with ease, the kind of guy every team needs when morale matters more than raw IQ. Young Song grew curious about this character and decided to take a closer look at his stats. It turned out that despite his mid-rank status, Smallwood had insane agility and surprisingly high intelligence. In another life, he could have been a scientist or a basketball player, but he chose the hunter path, believing it would let him help the world more. At one point, he even talked about wanting to learn martial arts, but it quickly became clear there were no free training sessions here. Young Song had to explain honestly that this path eats time like a black hole, and it made far more sense to sharpen an already formed style. Smallwood refused to back down, declaring he was ready to train day and night just to fight like Young Song. Without realizing it, he signed his own death warrant, because he had just gained a real mentor. After the official training ended and everyone else went home to rest, the two of them stayed behind, soaking the arena in sweat and blood. Smallwood very quickly regretted asking the master of training to teach him. He was completely unprepared for that level of intensity and brutality, cursing his own initiative with every passing minute. The master of training turned out to be more than just strict. He was a straight-up hell trainer, ripped straight out of TikTok nightmares with no unsubscribe button. He methodically pushed his student beyond every comfort zone, until tears actually welled up in Smallwood's eyes. Even so, Smallwood trusted his mentor and forced himself to rein in his emotions instead of breaking down completely. That was when his inner energy finally began to awaken, the first real step toward mastery. Even Young Song hadn't expected the process to go this smoothly, since this was his first time teaching anyone. As inner energy came under control, Smallwood started to feel his body and movement rhythm more clearly. His strikes grew faster and sharper, and at some point, he genuinely believed he could climb far higher in rank. The next morning, the hunters gathered again at the training arena and went through an especially brutal warm-up. Today, Ernest clearly planned to shock the newcomers again and shove them out of their comfort zones. He announced that teams of 6 would be formed to enter a dungeon and clear it fast and clean. The air heated up instantly, predatory determination flashing in hunters' eyes like wild tigers about to leap. After the late-night training, Smallwood felt confident and truly believed this time things would go his way. Ernest distributed the teams quickly, and Young Song found himself in a very curious lineup. Beside him stood Richard Parker, Ernest himself, the gifted Smallwood, the unbreakable Elizabeth Gutierrez, and one unfamiliar hunter. It almost felt intentional that the Goblin King wasn't paired with him. Young Song didn't care. After the Abyss, he was ready to clear a dungeon even solo. Compared to the Abyss, a regular dungeon simply wasn't scary anymore. He spoke briefly with each team member and realized they had a real shot if handled correctly. These people were born solo operators, but now they had to learn how to fight as one. There was also a new face. The final team member was a man named Hightaker Moneymaker. Overall, the group looked balanced, though one person clearly broke the rhythm. Anthony was way too flamboyant, yet possessed rare and dangerous abilities. Young Song watched everyone closely, remembering that expanding his pool of potential avatars mattered. Anthony Schneider, despite his awful personality, remained a genuinely talented hunter. If one could just adapt to his behavior, the guy could become a valuable asset. Even simply using one's abilities counted as training for a hunter. Anthony wielded 2 specific skills, mental defense and that infamous narcissism. These traits helped him stay mentally stable and impose control over a fight. Hightaker Moneymaker also turned out to be an interesting figure that somehow flew under everyone's radar. In some ways, he resembled Anthony, maybe because of the same excessive self-confidence. Money clearly came first for him, and every connection he built was purely for personal gain. That attitude rubbed many the wrong way, since most were used to at least basic mutual respect. Smallwood grew up in a poor neighborhood, and wasn't used to people obsessed with money to that degree. Still, it couldn't be ignored that Hightaker was a mid-rank healer with extremely high potential. Every time he talked about his skills, it sounded like a sales pitch. Yongsung stated plainly that he functioned just fine without healers and didn't need that kind of support. If the guy really wanted to be useful, he'd be better off staying out of the way and talking less. Those words cut deep, and from that moment on, Hightaker's arrogance only grew sharper. He swore to get his revenge and prove his worth right there inside the dungeon trial. When the arguments finally died down, the hunters stepped into the mysterious portal one by one. They were greeted by thick fog, dim light, constant dampness, and the crushing feeling that the space itself was pressing down on their shoulders. The trial of the Serpent Path demanded not only maximum output from each individual, but flawless coordination as a single unit. The dungeon had to be cleared faster than the rival teams, otherwise victory was off the table. The group immediately started clashing because everyone saw themselves as the main character and treated their opinion as the only correct one. Some pushed for a head-on assault, while others argued for slow, cautious movement, checking every corner. Tension between Elizabeth and Anthony hit critical levels, and she nearly caved in his well-groomed face with an iron fist. When emotions cooled slightly, it became obvious that one member had already broken away from the group. It was the Master of Training, moving as if the others didn't even exist. Plans and debates meant nothing to him. He charged forward and erased monsters the old-school way. The Abyss had taught him a simple rule: the weak overthink, the strong act without hesitation. If the team wanted to clear the trial fast, they'd have to shut up and keep up. Strangely enough, that mindset spread fast, and soon the whole group was slaughtering monsters at full speed. Chameleons with invisibility techniques could have become a serious threat. Anthony was forced to activate his life force detection skill to track the most elusive creatures. Enemy numbers dropped rapidly, and the clearing pace skyrocketed. At one point, the Master of Training even drew the Heavenly Moon Sword his friend had obtained from the Chinese government. He also reshaped the spatial storage gifted by Onyx. The artifact now rested on his belt, allowing instant access to whatever he needed. The battle raged on, and he moved, as if danger didn't exist. Anyone watching his movements was stunned by the speed and terrifying ease of his attacks. He shifted trajectories at the last possible instant, accelerating where others would have already lost balance. Behind him lay nothing but mountains of fallen monsters, while his allies increasingly played supporting roles. For someone like Anthony, this was a brutal blow to his ego. He was used to being the star, and now he clearly felt himself falling behind a newcomer. From that moment on, an unspoken rivalry ignited between them for the right to become captain. Elizabeth had only worried about Anthony's behavior before, but now she had a new reason for doubt. Ernest and his staff watched everything closely through the monitors. At one point, Ernest's assistant became especially interested in Anthony Schneider's actions. Anthony had always been talented, but lately his inability to function in a team had become impossible to ignore. His progress had slowed as well, raising the question of whether he was holding back a true leader. Ernest avoided jumping to conclusions and ordered continued observation. Sometime later, he was called to the main screen to witness something intriguing. The first team had turned into a living nightmare for monsters, moving like the original Avengers. They fought as if they had nothing to lose, advancing as a single organism. The Master of Training looked like a natural leader, while his rivalry with Anthony only added momentum. Somehow, the two complemented each other, even as the rest of the team performed flawlessly. Anthony had never seen teamwork this tight and couldn't tear his eyes away. Before long, nearly all the monsters were wiped out. Elizabeth could barely believe a group like this could operate with such consistency. Even Anthony, usually obsessed with stealing the spotlight, fit perfectly into the rhythm this time. The team pushed deeper into the dungeon, sensing the finish line was close. Elizabeth suggested a short stop to recover mana and grab a bite. Smallwood instantly backed the idea, hunger already driving him insane. But the moment they slowed down, the Master of Training shouted a sharp warning about hidden danger. He demanded immediate combat readiness and absolute focus. Anthony didn't believe it, claiming he felt no threat at all. In the same instant, an attack lunged straight at him, intercepted just in time by the Master of Training. Now they faced stone gargoyles, creatures with monstrous endurance and devastating power. These creatures were also called stone chameleons, shaped like devils carved straight out of solid rock. They could fully merge with stone, turning into the kind of enemy that becomes a real pain to deal with. Ernest watched the monitor calmly. This group had someone who kept the formation intact and prevented everything from falling apart. At the same time, the team was advancing too fast and clearly needed an artificial slowdown. The Trial of the Serpent Path was a dungeon whose information was completely classified from the public. 17 years ago, China had already sent a high-rank hunter squad into this place. Back then, the monsters didn't have absurd power levels, but they complemented each other perfectly, making them insanely hard to handle. Everyone tensed up, waiting for the moment the hostile creatures would finally reveal themselves. Yongsong felt the energy vibrations and calmly warned that a monster was closing in right now. In the very next second, the stone devil materialized in front of him, lunging in to tear him apart. The master of training reacted instantly, clenched his fist, and punched a massive hole straight through the monster's body. Even close combat mages had never seen strikes like that. This technique belonged exclusively to martial arts masters. Ernest fully realized that endless training in the abyss could push someone to a completely different tier of power. Yongsong blocked the first assault, and the remaining monsters retreated into hiding for a while. It felt like they were afraid to make the next move, switching to a waiting game. The difficulty of the trial was off the charts, as if Ernest had deliberately thrown them into hell. It was the kind of instructor mindset that loved dragging students far beyond their comfort zones. After some time, the hunters finally made camp, deploying a high-tech tent. They looked at their captain like a caveman staring at something shiny for the first time. Years in the abyss had made Yongsong miss the technological leap, and he didn't even know what ordinary drones were. There was no longer any need to leave someone on watch while the rest rested. Activating a drone and linking enemy detection magic was more than enough. Any mage could use this setup with ease, including Hightaker. For the first time during the entire raid, he was genuinely useful and executed everything flawlessly. In combat, he rarely took risks, but situations like this brought out his best side. Even if he was still obsessed with the money, writing him off would be a mistake. When Yongsong stopped, everyone fell silent. When he moved forward, the group followed without question. Everyone understood that he was leading from the front, wiping out monsters with pure martial arts. Once traps and defenses were set, it was finally time to eat. Yongsong reached into his backpack and pulled out a pack of rations. Dragon Juan was printed on the package, and for some reason, Yongsong felt slightly embarrassed for him. The others, however, stared at the rations with genuine interest. To them, this counted as a real delicacy. Apparently, they never cooked during raids, and were used to eating whatever garbage they could find. Yongsong didn't like that at all, and decided to look for proper ingredients. Options inside the dungeon were limited, and his gaze settled on a dead stone chameleon. Seconds later, the hunters realized their captain was insane. Normal people didn't start raids by cooking monsters. Instead of resting, he pulled out adamantine kitchen tools. Meanwhile, analysis continued in the instructor's room. Ernest closely observed the second group, trying to determine whether they would reach the objective. Unfortunately, that team was completely wiped out. The third group failed as well when gargoyles attacked from all directions. The hunters simply weren't prepared for such an extreme difficulty spike. Ernest had already started suspecting he'd gone too far, but then he was shown the feed from the first team. There was no chaos or screaming on screen. Guards surrounded the tent, and at the center, Yongsong calmly laid out loot like it was a casual picnic. The team captain held a frying pan, butchered the dead chameleon, and cooked something that looked like a masterpiece. He immediately made it clear that this meat was no ordinary ingredient, but something special. At first, the allies were skeptical, but the moment the smell hit them, they reacted like starving animals. Right then, it became obvious that the entire raid ration supply could be tossed straight into the trash. That was when things got interesting, because Yongsong had promised nothing and definitely never said he would share. Anthony stepped forward, declaring that someone this exceptional naturally deserved the best piece. He showered the chef with compliments, and Yongsong decided to show mercy to that self-obsessed kitten. The moment the narcissist tasted the rice with meat, he couldn't hide his genuine shock for a long time. He flooded Yongsong with praise and felt with pure disbelief how magical power restored itself in mere seconds. After that, everyone else rushed forward, demanding their share of the delicacy. They loudly promised loyalty even in the worst situations, ready to fulfill any request their captain might have. Yongsong had no choice but to take pity on these desperate hunters and give them emotions they would never forget. From that moment on, ordinary food was dead to them. After this, even Michelin-level cuisine felt like street fast food. The instructor's assistants had no idea how to even react to what they were witnessing. Mr. Ernest only laughed, as if people like this were always bound to pull something insane sooner or later. He quickly realized that Yongsong hadn't spent his abyss years on training alone. He had developed other skills as well, ensuring a serious edge once he returned home. When dinner ended, everyone dispersed and went to sleep. Only Richard Parker stayed by the fire, choosing to breathe slowly and stare into the flames. The Master of Training noticed his absence and stepped out to see what was wrong. The others slept like satisfied skunks, feeling their inner mana fully restored. Richard sat by the fire with slumped shoulders, staring at one spot for far too long, as if trying not to hear how confidently the camp behind him was breathing. He was used to standing out, but tonight everything felt different. Yongsong calmly explained that this was normal, and that even geniuses eventually face real competition. The conversation was cut short by a sudden sense of danger. Yongsong sensed the enemy and shouted so hard it felt like the monsters themselves thought an R-rated horror finale had begun. Everyone jumped up and grabbed their weapons, trying to understand what was happening. The Master of Training couldn't explain it right away, but he felt something massive approaching. An army of gargoyles appeared ahead, but that wasn't what he was truly warning about. Behind them lurked a stone hunter, a colossal worm with power on an entirely different tier. Its strength allowed it to push through other monsters without acknowledging any competition. It fed on stone, yet tracked and exterminated hunters with terrifying precision. The gargoyles struck first, and Yongsong was ready for them. By now, he had perfectly refined the heavenly maneuver technique. Richard Parker refused to hide behind the captain and chose to contribute. He simply forgot that something far more dangerous was lurking nearby. The earth split apart, and a monster of frightening proportions burst out of the crack. Yongsong reacted in time and pulled his ally out from under a lethal blow. The creature resembled Onyx in some ways, but its abilities were on a completely different level. Stopping its poisonous attacks and breaking its will would take serious effort. The Master of Training tightened his grip on the sword and stepped forward, preparing his signature strike. Even dense defenses failed. The Heavenly Moon Sword sliced straight through the worm's hide. Yongsong accelerated and delivered several more precise strikes in mere seconds. The allies didn't know whether to interfere. Their captain moved as if he needed no support at all. Cold calculation, absolute calm, and an icy gaze seemed to paralyze the prey. In the end, the monster meant to be the hunter's breaking point was decapitated in just 7 minutes. Even the seasoned Ernest had no words for what he had witnessed. From that moment on, he had no doubts. The Master of Training had fully unleashed his potential. It was now terrifying to imagine how the chairman had managed to recruit such a hunter. Since Dragon Juan had come up, it was time to return to his office. That same day, Ernest visited him to discuss the very man who had dominated the trials. Juan understood that if he had told the truth from the start, no one would have believed him. Even now, those words would still sound like a bad joke. Ernest reported that the trial had gone perfectly, and that Yongsong had proven himself not only as a martial arts master, but as a leader. All that remained was to hope that such a fighter would be interested in working with Dragon Industry. The dragon promised to handle the matter personally and thanked the instructor for his work. Meanwhile, in the clan's main lobby, the results of the trial were announced with full ceremony. The members of the first team turned out to be the only ones who cleared the dungeon from start to finish, earning the highest possible scores. Everyone talked about those lunatics non-stop, calling them real talents and the future elite of the American Guard. Seeing his name on the leaderboard, Anthony was satisfied with the outcome. That satisfaction dimmed slightly when it became clear that first place belonged to someone else. Because of that, he didn't even notice a sports car speeding past. His ego lagged his vision like an old Windows XP PC. Inside the car sat Moneymaker, the Master of Training, and the Goblin King, still suffering from a severe case of gaming addiction. The driver's endless chatter kept getting in the way of Gon clearing a new level. At one point, the Goblin King nearly exploded with rage, ordering the driver to shut up and just drive. Moneymaker was ready to do anything to stay on good terms with the team captain. Not long ago, they had managed to talk privately for the first time in the training hall. In truth, Moneymaker had only been strolling around the arena and had no intention of pushing himself. But the moment the Master of Training noticed him near the equipment, a sudden workout magically appeared. From that moment on, the money lover was forced to suffer and drown in sweat. A few hours later, when training finally ended, he could barely feel his legs. For the Master of Training, such loads were routine, something he had grown used to long ago. To unwind a bit, Moneymaker suggested driving around the city, seeing new places, and broadening their horizons. The idea landed well and was accepted without hesitation. Deep down, the Master of Training understood that Moneymaker simply wanted to stay close to a talented captain. There was nothing surprising about it. Most people gravitate toward leaders. That day, they planned to walk through a district known for its black market. The place was also called the City of Luck, since this was where the most questionable goods could be found. During the walk, the Master of Training felt nothing unusual, even though he was being closely watched the entire time. Figures with gleaming eyes beneath black hoods followed his every step. Their master had been insulted, and they had come to avenge the constellation of madness and blood. Moneymaker had hoped to buy interesting artifacts, but everything went sideways. Instead, the group bought piles of ingredients, as if preparing for a cooking show. After the shopping spree, Moneymaker suggested stopping by an auction. It was supposed to be especially interesting for someone who had spent many years in the abyss. As soon as the guard learned they were representatives of the Icarus clan, they were escorted inside immediately. First, they had to rent proper clothes and change. Places like this enforce strict rules. Once inside, they witnessed the sheer luxury and scale of the venue. Every guest wore expensive suits and clearly possessed money and influence far beyond a single city. For perhaps the first time in his life, the Master of Training wore a suit that perfectly matched his presence. Moneymaker rushed deeper into the hall at the scent of money, moving as if discounts on dignity were being handed out. At the same time, one of the guards reported the arrival of hunters from the Icarus clan. He passed along all the details and noted that 2 of them looked especially suspicious. Few people knew that the illegal auction had been run for years by the Hua sect. This was a Chinese martial arts clan that hid its identities, since such skills earned little respect in the modern world. They couldn't interfere directly now, but they were eager to see the Icarus hunter known as a martial arts master. Soon, the auction finally began, and silence fell over the hall. Everyone held their breath, waiting for something special. Before long, the room filled with gasps of awe as genuine abyss artifacts appeared on the stage. Lots sold for astronomical sums, meaning only wealthy businessmen and politicians filled the seats. The next item was a blazing thunder dagger of incredible durability and devastating attack power. Not long ago, Dragon Juan had given his friend a bank card to cover any financial problems. At the time, it felt like casual talk, and the Master of Training paid it little mind. Honestly, he didn't understand why he needed money at all, since his thoughts were consumed by training. But first came ingredients for cooking, and now the urge to fight for an auction lot awakened. $8,000 later, the blazing dagger became his. A surge of adrenaline washed over him, his heart pounding faster, like he was once again standing on the edge between life and death. At the very moment victory filled his veins, a strange figure in a black hood appeared behind him. Blood-red eyes locked onto their prey, promising that payback was already on its way. The figure hissed that no one walks away alive after insulting the constellation of madness and blood. All the previous fools were already rotting in the dirt, and today, the constellation's avatars intended to do the same to him. While security rushed to stop the dangerous fanatics, the Master of Training calmly prepared for battle. There wasn't a trace of fear in his movements. He assessed the situation instantly and even allowed himself a faint smile. The warrior constellation had generously flooded its avatar with hatred-fueled power, meant to take the offender's head. The warrior had no idea he was facing another constellation, one that had long forgotten how to fear. Against these 2 monsters, any UHC fight looked like a cheap stage show. Only here could one witness real special effects and the true level of combat. To avoid harming civilians, the Master of Training stepped closer to the stage where there was enough open space. The Goblin King clenched his relic, ready to personally cover his master. But the master chose to fight alone and calmly signaled for his companion to stay back. In a battle like this, the Heavenly Finger was unavoidable, a technique that pierces any barrier. The first clash made it clear at once. This was a fight of blood against light. The Avatar trusted completely in his invincibility and charged forward without hesitation. That confidence shattered the instant a crushing blow to the stomach knocked the air from his lungs. His breathing broke, and for several seconds he couldn't even inhale. The guards were afraid to interfere. They had never seen martial arts at this level. To avoid falling immediately, the Avatar tried to use his opponent's blood as a source of power. He didn't know that the Master of Training had long ago gained dominion over his own blood from nightmare demons. They had taught him how to block such techniques and turn an enemy's hunger against them. The lunar blade sank deeper, and the strongest avatar was torn apart from the inside. The remaining followers rushed in at once, desperate for revenge. Their survival instinct was gone. They moved like suicide fighters with nothing left to lose. Those kinds of opponents suited him just fine, and he sent them to the afterlife without hesitation. Realizing the avatars were failing, the warrior personally descended into one of them. The human body warped as muscles swelled, veins bulged, and eyes burned with madness. It was the perfect moment to unleash a suppression technique meant for truly powerful beings. His strength multiplied instantly, and he prepared for another collision. In that instant, it felt like he had returned to the abyss and tasted real happiness for the first time in ages. Training and the UHC arena no longer gave him that feeling, but clashing with avatars of another constellation awakened his true sense of freedom. A few precise strikes were enough to force the constellation's spirit out of its host. All opponents collapsed face down, barely able to move. Those who witnessed the fight never doubted for a second. Everything was under his control. Only after some time did security recover and begin restoring order in the hall. The Master of Training received a flood of apologies for what had happened. One of the guards seized the moment and dared to ask a few questions. He had never seen a master like this and wanted to absorb even a fraction of that experience. They invited him into a VIP room to talk in private. The Master of Training never placed himself above others and easily agreed to the conversation. He immediately sensed that the guards also practiced martial arts and treated them as equals. Soon, an old man from Manhwa entered the room, a longtime member of the local sect. If memory served, the legendary warrior Li Xiaowen had also belonged to this school. Then came the most unexpected revelation. He was told that the man he had admired his entire life was standing right in front of him. He instantly grabbed a piece of paper and a pencil, tears in his eyes as he begged for an autograph. Over 30 years, Li Xiaowen had aged greatly and looked like someone cast aside by society. Yet, to him, he remained an idol, carrying the same aura that once made him believe in the greatness of martial arts. Things got truly interesting next when the master asked Yongsheng to teach his people martial arts. China showed no mercy to any hunter who refused to swear absolute loyalty. Many hunters left China using the catastrophe as a convenient excuse to start independent lives. The Manhwa sect was formed from exactly those hunters who chose freedom over chains. Long ago, they secretly vowed to return and avenge their exile. But over the years, that dream became almost unreachable. During the Great Invasion, the sect leader Li Xiaowen lost an arm and a leg, and his former mastery faded along with his body. Then, the invincible Master of Training appeared, and with his arrival, martial arts began reclaiming their former glory, not through words, but through action. The elders who came to see what all the noise was about witnessed Yongsheng's fight and couldn't believe their eyes. From that moment, they knew he was the special one, capable of reviving the great sect and restoring its name. For Yongsheng, this was good news, since he needed to expand his circle of followers and strengthen his authority anyway. This way, he could lift martial arts back onto their feet and grow stronger not only as a hunter, but as a constellation. In that instant, Yongsheng felt his breathing deepen, his movements grow lighter, and his fatigue vanish, like stepping out of the gym after a perfect set. Now, it was clear how other factions gained power and influence. They didn't just win, they gathered loyalty. The Chinese sect offered loyalty in exchange for training, turning disciples into a living foundation for its future. If Yongsheng gave them advanced martial arts, they would carry out his orders and defend his name without hesitation. They quickly reached an agreement and decided to begin training soon before the opportunity dissolved into the noise of the world. After that, the satisfied Master of Training returned to his influential friend's office, like someone who had just made the right move. The day had gone well, and Yongsheng plainly reported everything that happened as if delivering the outcome of a fight. By then, Huan already knew that within the Icarus clan, Yongsheng was being hailed as a new superstar, with hunters whispering about him like a phenomenon. Then they spoke about the Hua sect and the once great warrior Li Xiaowen, whose name still cut deep into memory. Yongsheng honestly confessed everything that had happened, hiding nothing from his friend and avoiding any smoke and mirrors. Huan warned that if new equipment or conditions were needed for training, he was always ready to help, no questions asked. But for now, training had to be postponed, because the main event ahead was a battle with the warrior constellation. No one knew that Yongsheng and the invincible Master of Training were the same being, so he switched masks cleanly and calmly, making time for everything. The next day, the so-called Game of Stars unfolded in the depths of the abyss, and the ether itself felt stretched tight like a wire. The invincible Master of Training accepted the challenge and prepared for battle, as if returning to a place where everything is decided by a single strike. He declared that he had an avatar named Yongsheng, and that this avatar would personally step into the duel. The warrior accepted with delight, having long dreamed of crushing the slime from planet Earth in a public display. As a stake, he offered the Blood Fortress, a trophy obtainable only through an honest victory and a signed contract. Young-sung had little to choose from, but still found something to place on the table that sounded like a true challenge. If he lost, he would surrender the Cardinal of Plague and Darkness, a being capable of reversing time and breaking fate's script. Both sides agreed to the terms and signed a universal contract from which there was no retreat. In the event of victory, existential power would surge, and the Master of Training would ascend to a new level of influence within the abyss. After the contract was sealed, a flash of light struck the senses, and the avatars instinctively prepared for combat. The Cardinal of Plague and Darkness did not want to fall under another constellation's control, and silently hoped Young-sung would prevail. Preparations ended and the broadcast began. The universe launched premium content with no free trial. The main character faced a massive orc, a true titan straight out of a dungeon nightmare. The moment they clashed, the Master of Training felt the monstrous strength of his opponent, crushing even through the ether. He chose to begin by deflecting attacks and studying the orc, revealing nothing extra too early. It was necessary to find the monster's strengths and weaknesses before unleashing full power and breaking the game of stars. Raw strength was the creature's greatest trump card. A single swing felt like a chunk of reality collapsing. But its attacks were wide, crude, and slow, like it was smashing a wall instead of fighting a warrior. That meant acting first, reading the next move, and striking where defense was weakest. Clean, precise, no theatrics. Everything seemed clear, yet the pressure radiating from the orc was beyond words, felt even by the spectators. It resembled a typhoon that came not to win, but to erase an entire galaxy and leave only emptiness behind. Everyone watching the battle tensed instantly, as if they themselves were about to take that crushing blow. This applied not only to the monsters serving Young-sung, but even to the warrior constellation itself, which for the first time sensed real danger. No one could predict the finale because for now the forces looked evenly matched, and a single mistake would cost everything. The initiative rested with the Avatar, as his constellation had already poured additional resources and energy into him. And beyond the abyss, within the domain of the Cardinal of Plague and Darkness, unrest was brewing as well. The air there already smelled of change. The Cardinal felt it deep inside. His calm, confident life was about to get wrecked. If the Master lost, the Cardinal would be forced to switch planets and fall into servitude, a brutal career downgrade with zero chance of appeal. At first, he had been completely hollowed out after losing to the Master of Training, but over time he realized that life as an avatar was way more interesting than expected. No one shoved dirty work onto him, and for the first time in ages he felt free from chains and imposed rules. When his fate ended up on the line, the Cardinal raged for a long time, blaming destiny for being unnecessarily cruel. He even contacted his own constellation demanding answers, but Young-sung simply muted the noise. The Master of Training remained confident in victory, even with a massive, battle-hardened general of countless wars standing across from him. After several tense minutes of waiting, it was time to seize the initiative with total absorption magic. This technique allowed him to drain the opponent's energy and feed it back, turning enemy power into self-inflicted weakness. The first strike landed clean, and for the first time, the orc felt his own blood running down his arm. In response, the warrior constellation flooded its avatar with an extra energy source, and from that moment on, pain stopped registering. A fight that was supposed to be a casual stomp turned into pure hell right in front of every spectator. Maybe Young-sung had slightly misjudged the timing and challenged a constellation of this caliber a bit too early. Right now, the sixth circle of a magical skill known as the Crimson Strike was closing in on him. The defensive barrier had to endure maximum pressure, or the outcome would be sealed. The monster expected victory, and when everything detonated around him, he froze, waiting for the end. When the smoke cleared, it became obvious the human from Earth had not only survived, but was ready to keep going. He acted as if he hadn't even felt the blows, instantly activating absorption again without hesitation. At that moment, the Master of Training began draining his opponent's power, deciding the fight with ruthless efficiency. Mad energy leaked out of the orc's body, slipping away like sand through open fingers. He resisted desperately, but the strength kept draining, leaving nothing but emptiness behind. Stripped of his main advantage, he could no longer compare to the invincible Master of Training in any way. Young-sung shoved him back with both hands, and the monster crashed to the ground like a sack of trash. Nearly out of strength, the defeated general wanted the fight ended as quickly as possible. He curled in on himself, waiting for execution, but Young-sung didn't rush the decision. Once a duel is over, killing the opponent isn't mandatory. Those are the rules of abyssal combat. The warrior hid his emotions, but rage boiled inside him, barely contained by pride. After the Constellation battle ended, the invincible master of training received an additional surge of power. The Constellation of Madness and Blood automatically forfeited the Blood Fortress, and the territory shifted to a new owner. Yongsong officially entered the ranks of Earth's constellations and received his first position in the galactic ranking. This allowed him to reconnect with an old acquaintance who had been waiting for him all along. The Goddess of Scales was already somewhere nearby, and all that remained was deciding how to approach the conversation. For a move like this, Yongsong summoned an alliance of minor constellations and asked for their advice. The Lava and Magma Kitten warned that dealing with arrogant and foolish constellations required extra caution. The Mistress of Wishes backed him up, reminding him that the Goddess of Scales had always been questionable in competence. No one forbade Yongsong from meeting his old ally, but blind trust this time would be a mistake. She had already proven incapable of controlling her avatar, meaning heightened awareness was mandatory. There was also a chance the goddess already knew the path her former avatar had walked, and that she could be swayed. With the goddess issue nearly settled, Yongsong tried to learn more about the constellation ranking he had entered after his victory. The minor constellations knew nothing. They had never fought on that level or appeared in any rankings. With no answers forthcoming, Yongsong decided to personally meet the goddess after hundreds of thousands of years spent in the abyss. Upon entering her territory, he felt weightlessness, cold, and a strange urge to warm himself. He had to break into a run to reach the main castle where the goddess resided. Normally, the area would be packed with guards and attendants, but today the space felt disturbingly empty. Allied constellations stayed on the line, persistently urging Yongsong to stay alert. He moved slowly down the corridor and stopped before massive doors. Stepping inside, he was struck by the architecture and finally saw the goddess herself. She looked like a Madame Tussauds exhibit, flawless, cold, with emotions completely shut off. It felt as if she were asleep or deliberately ignoring the uninvited guest. He hadn't even chosen his words yet, but the goddess took control of the situation herself. As if she had completely lost her mind, she started bowing, breaking down in tears, and apologizing non-stop for condemning him to wander the abyss for endless years because of her mistake. It took serious effort to calm her down and explain that this kind of abyssal training had actually been something he enjoyed. All the other avatars accused the goddess of a stupid act and even turned away when Yongsong was finally lost in the abyss. The goddess stepped forward without a trace of doubt, as if Yongsong had merely stepped out of the next room and returned late. At that moment, she was absolutely convinced that the avatar of a new constellation stood before her. She had no idea what kind of path this man had walked, or that Invincible Master of Training was not a title, but a hard fact. Yongsong spoke on behalf of his constellation and offered the goddess an alliance with the Master of Training. The goddess had to admit that too much had changed since their last meeting. It turned out she had been left with almost nothing and could barely be called a full-fledged constellation anymore. Once, she had power, authority, and influence within her own galaxy, enough to stand shoulder to shoulder with higher constellations. When others wanted a glimpse of their future, they brought offerings and bowed their heads before the great woman. Now her existential power had dropped to the lowest tier, and everyone looked down on her. That was the price of believing godhood did not require updates or patches. It all started when Ada Kvanyo kept wandering the abyss, desperately searching for Yongsong. Because of that, the goddess could not field her strongest avatar in battles against other constellations. She was forced to swallow defeat after defeat, steadily losing influence, power, and respect. Yongsong had no intention of silently watching her fall and offered a way out. He promised that the Invincible Master of Training would help her reclaim her former glory and lost strength. All it required was forming an alliance and starting over from a clean slate. The decision weighed heavily on the goddess, but with no alternatives left, she accepted. Ever since the first gates opened on Earth, constellations had been fighting fiercely over the planet. Endless battles prevented any single one of them from fully claiming this prime piece of the galaxy. Eventually, the strongest constellations established a set of rules to maintain balance and avoid eternal war. These contracts gave birth to the constellation ranking that the Master of Training had recently entered. The constellation that takes first place in the ranking gains control over Earth. Achieving that requires a massive amount of existential power and followers. To reach number one must surpass the mightiest titans of the abyss, a challenge far from simple. The goddess was sitting at rock bottom of the rankings and never even dreamed of leadership. Yongsong, however, had far better odds, which is why she was willing to transfer part of her power to him. A single touch was enough to trigger the energy transfer. As a result, the Master of Training gained a new ability, clairvoyance. For brief moments, he could now peer into an unseen future and perceive what was hidden from others. With all matters settled, it was time to leave her planet and return home. On the way back, Yongsong contacted his allies and asked for their opinion on the new alliance. The Goddess of Scales listened in silence without interrupting or asking questions, a reaction that even the Mistress of Wishes found suspicious. Most likely, she would be useful during harsh trials if she managed to regain her former power. Still, there were concerns she might harbor resentment over Yongsong outplaying her favored constellation. The Mistress of Wishes advised Yongsong not to entrust the Goddess of Scales with important tasks and to simply observe her for now. As a final note, Yongsong invited his allies to participate in constellation battles, but they pretended not to hear him. Those cowards were still afraid of real fights and could not be relied upon in the future. After returning home, the main hero met a visibly tense Hwan, who had been waiting for news the entire time. He relieved his friend by explaining that the warrior constellation was no longer a threat to Earth. They sat down together and spent a long time dissecting every detail of the battle. Then the dragon asked for help, admitting that this time money would not solve the problem. At that moment, a guard unsuccessfully tried to stop Lawrence, who completely ignored him. She stormed into the office and immediately started throwing around top-tier insults. At first, it was unclear who she was yelling at until Ain explained that Yongsong had not answered her calls. She looked like a demon who had come to rip out his soul and drag it into eternal suffering. Hwan had to step in and ask his eldest daughter to calm down. After all, screaming like that at a guy whose phone had simply died during a constellation battle was a bit much. On top of everything, he had spent more than 30 years in the abyss, and modern technology still felt alien and awkward to him. The dragon was about to ask his friend for help, but it seemed his daughter had already decided to take the hunter with her. She was convinced that Yongsong needed to focus on his career right now, or he would miss the moment while every journalist still had their eyes on him. Once again, he would have to deal with things alone, because the dragon's daughter was famously relentless once she made up her mind. She grabbed Yongsong, put him in the car, and drove straight toward the eastern part of the city. She offered no explanations, acting as if the Master of Training was simply expected to understand everything without words. Before long, they arrived at a massive ship clearly prepared for an important gathering. Nearby, the strongest hunters knelt on one knee, greeting Miss Lawrence with absolute respect. A formal dinner was scheduled for tonight, and Yongsong would attend it together with his manager. He did not ask unnecessary questions, calmly headed inside, and entered the ship's restaurant. The kitchen was run by a head chef, poached from one of New York's most successful restaurants. Whenever Yongsong heard about high-end cooking, it always sounded like an unspoken challenge to him. He immediately checked the chef's stats and confirmed that this was a worthy opponent. Minutes later, a waiter brought champagne, white wine, appetizers, and the main courses. It turned out that every time Yongsong tasted something new, the system automatically expanded his recipe list. Miss Lawrence looked thoughtful and slightly down, as if she had just learned that the Barbie movie would never get a sequel. After abyss cuisine, ordinary food felt bland and painfully boring to her. She secretly wished Yongsong would cook something special for her again, strange as that sounded. After all the unnecessary chatter, they finally moved on to discussing the upcoming match. Ain asked Yongsong to stay calm and not take what she was about to say personally. Many fans believed he was a fraud who had switched classes through loopholes just to beat up weak opponents. People were convinced he was far stronger than he claimed, and deliberately fighting in a league with no real resistance. Those words meant nothing to Yongsong, as he genuinely did not care about public opinion. He had all the qualities of a superstar, yet behaved as if fame was the last thing on his mind. He did not even realize that at that very moment, an important press conference was underway ahead of the next fights. Maximilian was a mid-rank hunter who had long ago become a servant of an elf constellation. He stepped in front of the journalists and loudly challenged Yongsong to a duel to decide who really ran the scene. Lawrence showed the broadcast to her protege and explained that hunters were not supposed to refuse public challenges. If someone insults you in public, the rule is simple: crush them fast and make it hurt. On top of that, it was a perfect marketing move that instantly put the winner in the spotlight. The fight was scheduled within the next 2 days, leaving only time to gather intel on the opponent and step into the arena. Preparing the counter press conference took almost no time. Yongsong was dressed in an expensive suit again, lightly made up, and turned into a clean display piece version of himself. The opponent and the journalists waited for his words as he slowly settled into his chair. He had always been a man of few words and clearly lacked trash talk in the style of Conor McGregor. Reporters bombarded him with questions, trying to understand what he could possibly bring against a fighter ranked 21st. No one had forgotten the rumors branding Yongsong as a fraud hiding his true rank. He ignored the empty questions and made it clear that actions mattered more than words. If anyone thought he would lose to an elf-eared troll, that was entirely their problem. Once insults entered the mix, Maximilian instantly flared up, his face burning red with anger. He vowed that this match would be a sentence for the Abyss-born fighter, one that would leave him unable to walk. If he was so confident, the master of training suggested settling it right here and right now. Virtual reality was for the weak, and starting a real bloodbath without waiting sounded far more interesting. After that, the journalists fell silent, grabbed their cameras, and prepared to capture pure shock content. Yongsong openly provoked his opponent, who quickly deflated, going quiet like a scared rabbit. It became obvious to everyone that Maximilian had chickened out and refused to fight like a real man. After that, Yongsong addressed all his haters and promised that the upcoming fight would erase every doubt. Viewer numbers exploded instantly, and even people who did not care about the match were force-fed clips by the algorithms. Even though Yongsong behaved like a barbarian, Ayn Lawrence was satisfied with how everything unfolded. She knew perfectly well that this was exactly how superstars were made, especially when the guy could actually fight. Now, it was time to find suitable opponents so Yongsong could get a final tune-up before the clash with Maximilian. The stakes were insane. A single loss could permanently shut the door to public attention and the army of followers he needed. Ayn went through every hunter she knew, calculating who could even theoretically survive a sparring session with this monster. But the moment Yongsong heard about her plans, he shut down every idea of practice matches. Someone who had survived hundreds of thousands of years in the Abyss had no need for rehearsals against Earth fighters. He was already at peak condition, his movements sharpened into pure instinct, with no reason to waste time on showcase brawls. Ayn had no choice but to accept that her client trained by his own rules and step back. Before leaving, she still reminded him not to party, not to drink, and not to lose focus before the fight. It sounded almost ridiculous, considering the master of training had never touched alcohol in his entire life. Still, lying on a couch waiting for the next Harry Potter reboot was never an option either. The very next morning, Yongsong showed up at the Icarus Club gym. Familiar faces greeted him there, hunters who looked like they had permanently moved in among the machines. After the last trial, every one of them trained non-stop, desperately trying to close the gap between themselves and Yongsong. Today, he wanted no talk, no advice, no extra eyes on him, only silence and training. Instead of lifting iron, he began cultivating inner energy, forging a link between his body and the cosmos. In the Abyss, worthy opponents were rare, and more often than not, he had fought imaginary enemies. He created them himself, giving them power, speed, and pure killing intent. Yongsong repeated the same practice now, and it worked in a terrifyingly effective way. His imagination was so developed that he could spar even against higher constellations. All it took was directing his Kai flow, and the illusion gained shape, pressure, and weight. To Earth hunters, this looked like something far beyond the limits of their understanding. After witnessing this, even elite weight training would feel like child's play to Elizabeth Gutierrez and Anthony. They forgot their own routines and simply watched as Yongsong dodged blows from an invisible titan. He moved without pauses, without broken breathing, as if time itself synced to his rhythm. Only at the very end did his body remind him of reality, his arms growing heavy and his legs starting to shake. After that, Yongsong allowed himself to rest and headed for the UHC Hunters Stadium the very next day. This was the place where the fight watched by thousands was about to happen. After making sure he had eaten properly, Ayn Lawrence wished him luck and reminded him that the mind was a warrior's strongest muscle. The line came from Stallone, but in this world it was basically treated as ancient philosophy. This time, the stands were packed to the limit, tickets vanishing faster than rumors. This was what attention looked like when earned through flashy fights, fast wins, and ice-cold confidence. Some came to support the master of training, but most were hungry to see him fall. Today, on top of beating Maximilian, Yongsong had to break that attitude. Through the roar of hatred, he suddenly caught words of support and froze for a brief moment. Turning around, Yongsong saw a young representative of the Hua mountain sect. Those few sincere words were enough to make him feel truly unstoppable once again.